system is broken, Mr. Speaker, and he is making things worse. He is making things worse.
Their constituents will be affected.
Mr. Speaker, he is making things worse. Everyone is unhappy. Isn't it a good thing that the Chancellor is an expert at customer complaints?
Mr. Speaker, I think she's just read out the charge sheet against the last government. Everything is broken. And they come here every week with absolutely nothing to offer except complaints. Nothing constructive, no new ideas. They don't know what they're doing from one day to the next. Living in this fantasy world that everything was fine, apparently, for 14 years. Well, the country's fed up with those fantasies. They've got rid of those fantasies. We're going to take the hard decisions. They're jumping on every bandwagon that's passing. We're taking the country forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we enter the last week of Islamophobia Awareness Month, the Prime Minister will know that this year has been an extraordinarily difficult for British Muslims on the receiving end of society's most deplorable attitudes, considered easy prey for the far right and scapegoated by politicians endorsing institutional Islamophobia. And the reality is this emboldening and normalisation of Islamophobia, as highlighted in a number of reports, led to the race riots we saw on the streets of Britain this summer, where mosques and those who are visibly Muslim were subject to despicable attacks, with many left fearing for their lives. So will the Prime Minister condemn those in public office and positions of power who actively promote Islamophobia? Will he commit to adopting a definition today? And will he further outline what concrete steps the government is taking to rip out Islamophobia at its roots, including in this place?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise Islamophobia, and there's been a concerning rise in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism over recent months, and we are committed to tackling all forms of hatred, and we will work with others on an ongoing basis to make sure that we do. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the terrible impact of Storm Bert with all the flooding? Our thoughts are with all those affected, with thanks to our amazing emergency services. Mr. Speaker, Christine's father was told that he needed end-of-life care, but after a few days it was removed due to funding cuts. He was told that he wouldn't get it, and he died a few weeks later in excruciating pain. Christine said it was terrible to watch him suffer. Does the Prime Minister agree that whatever the House decides on Friday, it is urgent to improve access to high-quality end-of-life care? And will he make that a key focus of the 10-year NHS plan? And will he commit now to protect hospices from the national insurance rise?
I thank you for raising that case, and I think the thoughts of the whole House with the family involved. And, Mr. Speaker, obviously there's a very important vote on Friday, but whichever way that vote goes, we must invest properly in care across our health service, and that's why, in addition to putting the NHS back on its feet, we're putting forward a 10-year plan to make sure the NHS can give the care that everybody would expect across the spectrum, including end-of-life care.
Sir Ed Davey.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that reply, and I hope we'll hear more from ministers, particularly on hospices and national insurance, in days to come. Turning to the cost of living crisis, on Friday, Ofgem said that in January, energy bills would go up again after last month's 10% rise. Millions of people are really worried about how they're going to make ends meet this winter, not least hundreds of thousands of pensioners who are in poverty but above the pension credit limit, who will now lose winter fuel payments. So with energy bills going up again, will the Prime Minister reconsider and restore winter fuel payments?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the whole House is concerned about energy bills, which are actually lower this year than they were last year. The long-term way to deal with this is clean power by 2030 to make sure we drive those energy bills down on a permanent basis. And that's what we will do. On the winter fuel allowance, he knows very well what the government's position is, and I've rehearsed it, indeed, with him many times.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Antisocial behaviour involving modified and off-road bikes is a menace that has a huge impact on communities like mine in Sunderland. While I welcome the work Northumbria Police do in partnership with our council on this issue, they need stronger powers and more resources. Can the Prime Minister outline how he will back the police to tackle the misery caused by intimidating and downright dangerous antisocial behaviour on bikes?
Well, I thank him for raising this, because antisocial behaviour affects so many people. Sometimes it's described to me as low level. It isn't in the impact it has, particularly when it comes to off-road bikes. And that's why we're implementing tough new respect orders, which will give powers to the police, including powers to seize off-road bikes, but crucially adds a power of arrest for breach of the orders, something that's been missing in recent years. So we will tackle this because it blights communities across the country.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everyone in the House will be aware, we're currently in the middle of BBC Anti-Scam Awareness Week. And of course, the advice in that context is always simple. If you see a scam, you should report it. So with that in mind, can the Prime Minister advise the House? Is he aware of anyone who's promised to reduce energy bills only for them to increase? Is he aware of anyone who promised to back business only to tax business? And is he aware of anyone who promised to protect pensioners only to pick their pockets for their winter fuel allowance?
Well, it's very good to see.
Sorry. The gallery will not clap and not interrupt the proceedings. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very glad to see him in his seat in this House, as I'm sure many of his colleagues in Scotland share that sentiment. What I can point to is a government in Scotland that promised to take Scotland forward and took them backwards. So I can identify the first one. It's right there.
Daria Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. November marks Islamophobia Awareness Month. Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Acts of such mindless desecration only serve to fuel division and hatred within our society. Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
Can I agree with him that desecration is awful and I think should be condemned across the House? We are, as I said before, Mr. Speaker, committed to tackling all forms of hatred and division, including, of course, Islamophobia in all of its forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sarah and her family have farmed beef and cattle in my Gordon and Buchan constituency for over 70 years, and they'd always planned for her sister to continue the family legacy. Earlier this year, Sarah's mother died very suddenly and unexpectedly, and she was just 58. Sarah said to me that despite already having a tragic year, it was made even worse after the budget, saying that changes to agricultural property relief has hit us hard when we're already struggling with bereavement and trying to cope with losing mum. What would the Prime Minister say to Sarah and her family on what has been the most difficult year of their lives, in light as well of the family farm tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to her for raising the case and the awful bereavement. And if she would kindly send me the details of the case, then I'll certainly have a look at it. In relation to farming more broadly, as she knows, £5 billion was set aside in the budget over the next 2 years as an investment in farming. That's the biggest amount that's ever been set aside. I hear the chuntering, but they actually failed to spend the last farming budget by £300 million. On the question of inheritance and family farms, obviously it's important to bear in mind in a typical case, which is parents passing to a child, the threshold is £3 million, and that is why, as she knows, the vast majority of farms will be totally unaffected.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southwark faces a significant challenge of antisocial behaviour, but fewer police today than in 2010 due to Tory cuts in coalition with the Lib Dems. As the Prime Minister fixes the postcode lottery and law and order, will he consider the request from Southwark Police, Southwark Council and myself for our community to be a pilot test area for the new respect orders to address this serious problem?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this because public has been badly eroded under the last government, and we will drive that up with a major programme of reform. That includes recruiting 13,000 more police into neighbourhood policing and the tough new respect orders, coupled with the power to arrest for breach of the order.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sincerely hope that all of us in this House agree that good government is transparent government. In response to my written question on publishing the number of foreign nationals receiving universal credit, I was informed by a Department of Work and Pensions Minister that the feasibility of developing suitable official statistics was being examined. Will the Prime Minister today commit to using his good offices to publish this data transparently?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this, and I know there's been an exchange on it, and as soon as I've got an update for him, I will provide that for him so that he's got it. Thank you.
Waverley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within weeks of a Labour government, the government delivered for the mine workers in the mine workers pension scheme. It was so well received and it was justice done. However, is it not time to seek the truth with regards to the policing during the miners' strike? And would the Prime Minister commit to an early and full inquiry into the policing during the miners' strike, something which this lot denied for generations?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this. That question of the mine workers' pension scheme reversed a historic injustice, and I was so pleased we're able to do that in the budget. In relation to the miners' strike, as I think he knows, I've met some of the Orgreave campaigners and listened very carefully to what they say. They are entitled to the truth, and we're thinking carefully about what the next step should be in order to deliver that for them.
Mambala Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month marks 2 years since the death of Cody Fisher, a young man from my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon. Cody was a talented footballer with a bright future whose life was tragically cut short when he was stabbed in a nightclub in Birmingham. His mother, Tracy, has been campaigning tirelessly in his memory for legislation which would require venues to wear bleed kits and metal detectors. In the light of the government's commitment to tackling knife crime, will the Prime Minister meet with Tracy and me to discuss these vital proposals to better protect young people like Cody from the devastating impact of knife crime?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising the tragic case and pay tribute to Tracy for her campaigning. I've met a number of families on this issue of bleed kits, so I know firsthand just how important it is. We are taking measures in relation to knife crime, which includes banning the sale of online knives, making less available, a course to take young people out of offending where we can, and real penalties. But I am happy to look at bleed kits, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to hear more of what we're doing, but also to make her case.
Rachel Hopkins.
Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my register of interests. The proposed closure of Luton's Vauxhall van plant by Stellantis is devastating news for our town. Over 1,000 jobs at risk and the future prosperity of our town threatened. So can the Prime Minister assure me there will be cross-departmental response to support the automotive sector, but importantly, good skilled jobs in Luton?
Yes, I will, and I know and thank her for raising this because it is a difficult and uncertain time for workers in Luton and her constituents and their families. And that's why we're working with the industry. There will in fact be a statement later on today, Mr. Speaker, about this. It's important we do whatever we can to support these communities.
Then Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tenbury Wells was flooded again with Storm Bert last weekend. The second time the town has been flooded this year, and it's a town where it's only a case of when, not if, it will flood again. And the situation is made even more devastating for residents because there is a fully developed flood defence plan that is partly funded for the town. And the budget carried forward £2.4 billion for flood defences. Can the Prime Minister commit to be able to use his offices to finally get this scheme built and to fix the foundations of Tenbury Wells?
I'm grateful to her for raising this, which is an awful situation for her constituents. We all know how devastating flooding is, the initial damage that it caused, but then the ongoing damage, including problems then of insurance, etc., that then prevail for many, many years. We are committed to tackling this. That's why we set aside the money that we did in the budget, and I'll happily arrange for her to have a meeting with the relevant minister to look at the particular details of her case. But I thank her for raising it because I do know for her constituents it's such an important issue.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend in Cwmtaleiri, torrential rain caused a landslip. Slurry, even boulders, poured down streets. People were afraid. The Chancellor just agreed a welcome £25 million for coal tip maintenance in Wales. Given the impact of extreme weather events, will the Prime Minister continue to prioritise coal tips to keep our communities safe?
Yes, I will, and I know how much of a concern it is to his constituents. Indeed, we went together to meet some of those constituents last time there was terrible flooding, but that commitment to the £25 million in relation to coal tips is very important. And what I would say on flooding, we've now had two questions on this. If other members of the House do have individual issues they're not able to raise here, if they get in touch with myself or my office, I'll make sure that they get whatever they need in support of their constituents.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course we too welcome the ceasefire in Lebanon. But now that arrest warrants have been issued for his allies, Netanyahu and Gallant, the Prime Minister's determination to supply Israel with the weapons it requires to carry out its atrocities in Gaza, which has always been morally repugnant, is now completely untenable. But what these warrants would do is present him with a perfectly valid legal avenue by which he can end the UK's complicity in this slaughter. So will he do that, or will the Prime Minister continue to choose to licence F-35 components to a regime which is now led by a man wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity?
We've set out our position under the current law, as he well knows. I've set out my position very, very clearly in relation to the sale of capability to Israel to defend itself against attacks such as those from Iran. And I'm very clear that we'll continue to do so.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Derby City Centre is turning the page on 14 years of Conservative decline, with a new performance venue, a new business school, and restored market hall. But across the country, we see too many empty shops and quiet high streets. This budget is putting more money into the pockets of working people to spend supporting local businesses. Will the Prime Minister commit, contrary to Conservative scaremongering, to support and protect small businesses that are the beating heart of our high streets?
They can chunter all they like. She's describing their legacy. Describing their legacy. We are turning that around. We're supporting small businesses. We're supporting the high street. We're rebuilding our country as they go backwards.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Exmouth and Exeter East and our neighbours across the South West are understandably concerned about the rail disruption and potential economic damage that the HS2 construction at Old Oak Common will cause to our region for at least the next 7 years. So, will the Prime Minister please commit to producing a full mitigation plan as soon as possible to address these issues and to ensure that the South West does not lose out?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to him for raising the issue, which is of real importance to his constituents, and we have committed £30 million to mitigate the impact of the construction at Old Oak Common. Local services will be unaffected, and current plans will see services run between Exeter and London Euston. But I'm very happy again to arrange a meeting with the relevant minister if he wants that, in order to follow up on the particular concern of his constituents.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After 14 years of the Tories, our criminal justice system is on its knees, leaving just 4.4 of domestic assault cases recorded by the police, resulting in a conviction. With Monday just gone being the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, can the Prime Minister tell us what he's going to do to ensure the criminal justice system works for women and girls in North West Leicestershire and beyond?
Well, she's right to say the criminal justice system was broken by the last government, like everything else that they touched in the 14 years. Mr Speaker, we take this extremely seriously. We've made a commitment to halving violence against women and girls. We're taking a number of measures in relation to that, piloting, for example, domestic abuse protection orders and making it clear we will introduce a standalone offence of spiking. These are some of the measures which, frankly, we ought to be able to work across the House on, because the issue is of such importance.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ukraine faces a hell of a battle on its eastern front with Russia, but on the home front, the challenge is just as great. Just facing a harsh winter, just last week it was reported that 80% of its energy infrastructure is either damaged or destroyed. They desperately need power generators and associated equipment. So will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to discuss the provision of energy aid to this important ally, Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we have provided support. This is a very serious issue, £370 million of support to the energy sector in Ukraine, which is being targeted by the Russian strikes. I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister, and I'm pleased that on this issue there is unity across the House in our defence of Ukraine in the face of Russia's aggression.
Alex Brewer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After years of neglect under the previous Conservative government, GP surgeries and across North East Hampshire, they are preparing now for huge bills to pay increased employer national insurance contributions. Heart Health Partnership in Fleet estimates this will cost them 3 nursing salaries and have already reduced staff hours by 50 per week, with more cuts in January. Can the Prime Minister please tell GPs in my constituency which patient services they should cut in order to pay the bills?
Mr Speaker, she's absolutely right that the NHS was broken by the last administration, and the Darcy report makes that absolute. They should hang their heads in shame, frankly. We are providing in the budget £22 billion of additional funding this year for our NHS. That's a huge investment in our NHS, which is much welcomed across the NHS, much needed across the NHS. We will, of course, work with GPs and consult the sector on the services they provide and the money that they're entitled to in return. And all of that funding will be confirmed in the usual way.
Johnny Maynard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We recognise that Labour is determined to defend the economically disastrous Conservative policies of being outside the customs union and single market. However, does the Prime Minister agree with the principle that where it is in our country's interest to maintain alignment with EU standards so we can better sell our products internationally, we align, and where it is in our interest to diverge, we diverge?
I certainly agree that the deal we got under the last government is not the best deal that we can get, and that's why we are determined to reset the relationship, which we have already begun. Obviously, there will be no return to freedom of movement, the customs union or the single market, but beyond that, we can increase, I think, and improve the situation, whether it comes to trading, to security and other cooperation, and we're actively working on that.
Final question, Frank McNally.
very much, Mr Speaker. Following a major fire at the Tradeby depot in my constituency in 2021, Scotland's clinical waste was forced to be transported to England due to a complete lack of forward planning. Tradeby was only appointed after the previous contractor collapsed, leaving human remains languishing in a warehouse, and it's now been revealed that the Spanish company was bailed out with £5.4 million of taxpayers' money. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the SNP government has consistently failed to get a grip of clinical waste disposal and must act appropriately to protect the public purse and ensure public safety?
Well, I do agree with that, and it's not. It's the rule rather than exception when it comes to the SNP government. And the challenge for them now is they've got the powers to act. They've now been given the money to act. They've run out of excuses.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We'll let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the statement. Secretary of State for Business, Jonathan Reynolds.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I wish to make a statement on the announcement by Stellantis yesterday on the future of their manufacturing sites in the United Kingdom. Can I begin by saying I know yesterday was a dark day for Luton. This is an iconic plant, powered by a talented workforce, and there are very few people in the town who don't know someone who works at the site. I want to outline the steps the government has taken to try and prevent this outcome and how we're going to support the industry and the area going forward. Mr Speaker, the Transport Secretary and I found out about the challenges at this site just 10 days after the election. The global CEO told us he felt extremely frustrated by the lack of action from the previous government, which meant his desire was to close the Luton plant. Since then, we have been involved in intense negotiations with the company to try and find a way to keep the site open. Following these initial meetings, in July of this year, the company announced its intention to conduct a review of its operations in response to the significant pressures they were facing in key markets. Following the review, the company set out plans on Tuesday, which will see manufacturing at the two current Stellantis plants consolidated into a single location. We were and are aware that Stellantis has significant excess capacity across Europe. The company's talk of efficiency and investment elsewhere will of course be positive for their bottom line, but it will come as no comfort to the workers affected. For over a century, Vauxhall as a brand has been synonymous with Luton, and we are bitterly disappointed to hear that this relationship looks likely to end. Our number one priority is the people of Luton, who will of course be devastated by this decision. News like this rips through the heart of communities, sending shockwaves beyond those immediately impacted, through their families, their communities and the businesses they support. I myself grew up in a car community, and I know what it is like when half the street work at the same site. We have asked the company to urgently share their full plans with us and to work with the government so that every single worker who is impacted receives the support they deserve. The Department for Work and Pensions stands ready to help anyone affected with the rapid response service designed exactly for these kinds of scenarios. It provides vital support and advice to both employers and their employees facing redundancy. I want the House to be aware that we have done everything we possibly can to prevent this closure from happening. My Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, and I met Stellantis many times over the summer and again on Tuesday morning to discuss the situation and the acute pressures the company is facing. We've worked hard to find a solution that would support the business and ensure people kept their jobs. And we confirmed in writing we were willing to consider any solution put forward. However, despite our best efforts, we have been forced to accept that this is ultimately a commercial decision by Stellantis as they respond to wider challenges within the sector. And I'll be frank, honourable members, these challenges are not confined to any one company. Car manufacturers around the world are battling with increased costs, supply chain issues, and changing consumer demand in a highly competitive, fast-evolving market. Honourable members will know that last week, Ford also announced 800 job losses in the UK over the next 3 years as part of a major restructuring programme across the whole of Europe. Many of the challenges faced by our car manufacturers are global in nature, and they cannot be resolved by UK government intervention alone. And whilst this announcement is not what we wanted, nor what we worked towards, we must not mischaracterise this. It categorically does not signal a retreat by Stellantis from the UK. The plans announced by the company will also see them investing £50 million as they consolidate manufacturing at their Ellesmere Port plant in Cheshire. Honourable members will know that Ellesmere Port is the UK's first all-battery electric vehicle plant, and Stellantis' decision to bring production of the Vivaro electric van to there is welcome. We will, of course, continue to work closely with the company on next steps of the consolidation process, including the proposal to offer affected workers a relocation package to take up roles at Ellesmere Port. The investments being made at Ellesmere Port and elsewhere demonstrate that there are real opportunities for UK manufacturing as part of the move to zero-emission vehicles. But this transition has to be properly managed, and it requires a government that's on the pitch, something the car industry finally now has in this government. The government is determined to support automotive companies as they revamp their production lines, adjust their business plans, and develop the technology needed for the next generation of zero-emission vehicles. These cars and vans are greener, they're cleaner, and they're essential to our net zero ambitions. Roughly 30% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions come from cars, vans and lorries. To tackle this and wean our country off imported fossil fuels, we do need emission vehicles. But this government is resolute that this transition must be done in partnership between government, industry and, of course, consumers. And that is why my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, and I are listening closely to the concerns of the automotive industry and the wider sector about the transition to electric vehicles and the Conservative Party's zero-emission vehicle mandate. We held a roundtable earlier this month to hear directly from major automotive companies, from the SMMT and the charging sector. And in response, we will be shortly fast-tracking a consultation on our manifesto commitment to end the sales of new purely petrol and diesel cars by 2030. But we will use that consultation to engage with industry on the previous government's ZEV transition mandate and the flexibilities contained within it, and we will welcome on board their feedback as we move forwards. We want to do everything we can, together with industry, to secure further investment into the British automotive sector now and over the long term. It is why in the budget the Chancellor committed £2 billion in R&D and capital funding to support the zero emissions vehicle manufacturing sector and supply chain. And our industrial strategy will also give the automotive sector the certainty it deserves and send a clear signal to global boardrooms that this government is in this for the long term. We want to invest alongside them, create a policy environment that allows them to prosper and help them do what they do best, bringing good jobs to every part of this country. And through the National Wealth Fund, we're unlocking billions in private investment to invest in new green infrastructure, including gigafactories, supporting growth and job creation, not just in the automotive sector, but in the wider economy too. And we're working with investors to build a globally competitive electric vehicle supply chain in the UK, laying the foundations for growth over the long term. Mr. Speaker, the closure of the Luton plant by Stellantis is a bitter blow to our car industry, to Luton and to the workers who made Vauxhall a world-class brand producing world-class cars and vans. But we must not lose sight of the fact that these vehicles will continue to be designed and built here in the UK at Ellesmere Port. And that matters to me and it matters to the government. When I say decarbonisation must not mean deindustrialisation, I mean it. Winning the race to net zero and having a world-leading automotive sector must go hand in hand. We must never undermine the transition as the previous government did, but we will be pragmatic on ensuring regulation and incentives are working as they should. Contrived culture wars are not what this industry needs. Instead, it needs a partner in government ready to look at the practical solutions necessary, and we stand ready to do that. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. This is a sad day for the 1,100 workers at the Luton Vauxhall factory, and our thoughts are first and foremost with them and their families. They are the most recent custodians in a long history that goes back to 1905, when their factory opened the doors for the first time. Luton-built white vans are icons of British business, representing to many the hard graft and skill of millions of traders, the self-employed and small businesses across this country. Mr. Speaker, we on these benches stand by these hard-working people. We're on the side of the plant's workers because we know the value of skilled work and the transformative power of British business. The closure of the Luton plant, I fear, is just a down payment on jobs that will be lost under this government's relentless attacks on industry, its neglect of the realities of business, and its failure to meet its promise not to raise taxes. The government owes it to the plant's workers to at least be honest. This decision is the direct result of a government policy that is simply unworkable for industry. Stellantis told us as much when they said that this decision was made in the context of the zero emissions mandate. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders has said that the UK situation is particularly acute, with arguably the toughest targets and most accelerated timeline on the world. And there are unsustainable business costs undermining UK industry. The government's policy on zero-emission vehicles is a jobs killer. They say they've been talking since July. So why today, Mr. Speaker, this panicked U-turn when it's already too late? Under the last government, we acknowledged that the previous vehicle mandate was too stringent. We took the decision to push this back, recognising the impact that it would have on industry. We listened to Unite the Union on this. His party unilaterally reversed those changes and brought the deadline forward to 2030. Instead of Unite, he listened to the member for Climate Central in Doncaster North. But even today, the Secretary of State speaks of ending the sale of new purely petrol and diesel cars by 2030. He's tried to slip a subtle change in there, the consequences of which are significant. And whilst I welcome that for once this government has listened to business, he appears to be misleading them at the same time. Can he explain exactly what his policy is? There are real costs, as we see today, to these targets. And instead of having the courage to stand up and recognise that he was wrong, his solution appears to be yet another consultation which is yet to take place. How many automotive businesses has the Secretary of State spoken to about these targets? And in any of his conversations with Stellantis, did they ask him at any point to remove the fines on their business? Has he met with the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster to entreat him to row back from his ideological pursuit of domestic targets, ignoring the fact that they are exporting jobs, exporting British jobs, Mr. Speaker, to more carbon-intense economies? But most of all, we mustn't ignore the elephant in the room about the timing of this decision. This follows a budget that has declared war on business, a triple whammy of tax rises that removes incentives for growth and investment, a 25 billion jobs tax which has left boardrooms across the country putting recruitment and pay rises on hold, and alongside an employment rights bill written hand in hand with his union paymasters that's already deterring businesses from hiring in Britain. Businesses are ringing the alarm bells. The CBI, the British Retail Consortium, UK Hospitality and the Society of Motor Manufacturers have all said the pressures on business are too much to swallow. Open letter after open letter, statement after statement, Labour are not on their side. They lied about their plans. They're attacking working people, and now they're attacking the vans they go to work in. The businessmen and women who gave Labour the benefit of the doubt are regretting it. When will the Secretary of State listen? When will his government abandon its attack on British business? Will he lead the charge to change course? And why won't he suspend the fines and targets which have led to today's tragedy?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, that is the single most dishonest statement I've ever heard in the time in this House.
I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be withdrawing that comment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to clarify some of the points the honourable gentleman raised on the other bench. The ZEV mandate policy is a...
We're on the same side. We'll be quiet, won't we? Secretary of State.
The ZEV mandate policy, the Shadow Minister mentioned, is a policy of the previous government, of which he is aware. The changes the previous government made were not to the ZEV mandate. They were not pragmatic on it. They changed the destination and kept the fines and the ramp-up and the thresholds exactly the same. So what they did was give no flexibility or pragmatism in how that policy operated, but still undermined the transition, leading to a massive reduction in consumer confidence. And he asks, has the honourable gentleman talked to industry? I was the guest speaker at the SMMT dinner last night. 1,000 people there from every bit of the automotive sector. They are absolutely clear that it's the destination they support. It's the Conservative government, the previous Conservative government's policy as to how this operates, which is causing them the problems. And as I said in the statement, if he was listening, or if he'd read it in advance, 10 days in to this government, we were told this plant was likely to close. It is on this side of the House that we've acted with pragmatism, been willing to look at any part of this policy in order to make sure this outcome didn't happen. The simple truth was that it was too late after 14 years of failure to be able to put this right. So I just have to say to him, with all politeness, he is out of touch with industry, he is out of touch with workers, he's even out of touch with what the previous Conservative government did, and I think that speaks for itself.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Burns.
This is indeed a hard day for Luton, and I welcome what the Secretary of State had to share with the House today, and I welcome the review that he's announced of the zero-emission mandate. As part of that review, I do hope that he looks again at the perversities of the regime that he inherited that could involve makers of petrol engines in this country transferring credits to companies like Elon Musk's Tesla and Chinese EV makers. But if we really want to make sure that there is a level playing field, Mr. Speaker, why don't we reverse the decision of the last Secretary of State, follow the EU Commission and launch anti-subsidy investigations into Chinese EV makers? The Trade Remedy Authority is ready to go. It just needs the Secretary of State to give the green light.
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee and indeed for our exchanges we had in the committee evidence session yesterday. He is right to say that what we have inherited is a position where how the policy operates, the flexibilities that are contained within it, and the fact that no domestic producer is on track means effectively the transfer he has described is the problem. That is when I say decarbonisation cannot mean deindustrialisation. It is precisely that we've inherited that we are critiquing. Now, we don't want to undermine the transition in the way the previous Prime Minister did, because anyone in industry in this sector will be able to tell honourable members opposite how disastrous that was. But what we need to give is breathing space and making sure that that policy is operating in a way which doesn't have any of the kind of perverse incentives he's described. Now, on the subsidies point and the trade remedies and the potential response from the UK, we've got to bear in mind two things. First of all, the system we've inherited is industry itself, which makes the application for that. I do have powers as Secretary of State to do that, though they've never been used to my knowledge. But we must also remember that the UK automotive sector is a world-class export-led sector. If we were to go in any kind of protectionist route on principle, we've got to bear in mind what it would mean for the markets we sell those vehicles into. If you sell 80% of your product abroad, it is the international export position you've got to consider alongside the domestic market. But I say again, if industry makes that request, of course it would be followed in accordance with the way the system operates.
Clive Jones, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for the advance copy of his statement. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I also attended the Society of Motor Manufacturer and Traders annual dinner, same as the Secretary of State, and greatly appreciated the opportunity to hear directly from a sector that is so important to the British economy. UK car manufacturing brings billions of pounds into our economy and employ hundreds of thousands of people directly and many more thousands of people across their supply chain. They are at the forefront of the green transition and in making transport sustainable for the future via electric vehicles. And most importantly, they are always willing to be frank with me and other politicians because they reaffirm to me that the industry sees major hurdles on the horizon. And the closure of Vauxhall's 100-year-old factory in Luton is a sign of great troubles ahead. Inevitably, the Conservatives are going to play politics with this announcement. But there is still no apology from them for trashing the economy. There is not one moment of reflection that the previous government's policy on electric vehicles was a disaster. It simply did not do enough on infrastructure and incentives. And therefore the government need to fix the Tories' mess. As a starting point, the government urgently need to work with Vauxhall to mitigate what will be a major shock for this area. The government have said that it will fast-track a consultation, but that needs to be fast-tracked today. Mr. Speaker, urgency is the key. When will the consultation start, and when does the Minister expect it to report? The previous government did not do enough to incentivise people to buy electric vehicles, nor did it provide the right infrastructure. What is the government doing to increase sales of electric vehicles and to increase the number of charging points in places like my constituency of Wokingham?
Seriously. I'm grateful to him for his questions and his observations, and apologies. He's had to hear me speak twice on this in the short passage of time from last night till today. But he asks the Conservative Party to apologise for their economic record. That case stands for itself. But I would also like to know, given how urgently this was presented to us as a new government, what they were doing at the end of the last government. What did they know? What conversations were they aware of? Because certainly what we inherited was a position of extreme frustration from the company. I can't imagine that hadn't been conveyed in some way to our predecessors. There were policies in terms of specific questions in the budget around charging infrastructure. I recognise that's a key part of this, as well as the £2 billion for the R&D, Automotive Transformation Fund, and the partnership with business that we use that for. He asks on the consultation, obviously that will come from the Department of Transport. Shadow Secretary of State asked about why that's a consultation. Well, the previous government set these policies in primary legislation, so he knows there are processes to follow in order to do that. Any conversation about the thresholds and the existing policy, that is for my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport. But I go back to this point about how the system works, the flexibilities, the allowances, how we can make sure that we are giving automotive manufacturers in the UK a system that lets them get to the transition they want and the consumer wants, but does it in a way which works with industry to enable that transition to happen for the benefit of the United Kingdom.
Rachel Hopkins.
I'm grateful again, Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my register of interest as a trade union member and also someone with friends who have heard that they've lost their jobs. Closing the Luton site will damage our local economy, with 600 jobs at risk, more in the supply chain, and workers and families receiving this devastating news just before Christmas. I welcome the comments from the Secretary of State saying decarbonisation must not mean deindustrialisation and the decimation of good, skilled jobs. Will his announcement today move the dial in discussions with Stellantis to help protect the Luton site? And I welcome his tone of taking this seriously compared to members opposite. So will he join me in visiting workers and their trade union representatives at the Luton site to listen to their concerns?
Secretary of State.
Extremely grateful to my honourable friend for her question, and I believe everyone in the House who cares about the automotive sector and working people in this country will share the sentiments that she has put forward about the scale of what this will mean for Luton. I can absolutely promise her, yes, I'll take up her invitation to come with her to the site. I can also promise her the full deployment of my department and indeed all of my colleagues across government to whatever help is required. We are in conversations with Stellantis, as the union are, I believe, about the details of the package that will be presented to the workforce, but of course I'll engage closely with her and her honourable friend for the other side of Luton in order to make sure that it's to the maximum benefit of her constituents in the wider area.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Bedfordshire MP, I know how significant the Vauxhall plant is to our local economy and as a local employer. The Minister has explained how devastating this will be for families locally, not just in Luton, but also in my constituency in mid-Bedfordshire. But the Minister, unfortunately, has said very little about how he's going to support the people that are losing their jobs. Is the Minister concerned that this government's tax on jobs will make it much more difficult to replace the 1,000 manufacturing jobs in Bedfordshire?
Grateful to him for his sentiments, but the straightforward answer to that question is no. This is a skilled and talented workforce. They haven't lost their jobs because of any deficiencies on their part. They have been in a position where the combination of the overcapacity in Europe, I mean, I'll be frank, I believe from the minute we came to office, I think this closure was already what the company intended and has nothing to do whatsoever with government policy. I recognise the pressures on the existing policy we've inherited, hence the pragmatism on our part as a government to make sure that's working for the transition. But I have absolutely no doubt whether these workers choose to take advantage of the relocation offer or are in demand elsewhere. They're brilliant, talented people who will be in demand.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I refer members to my register of interests? Before I start, I want to put on record that the 1,100 people that will be losing their jobs in Luton today deserved much better than the response from the Conservative front bench. It was very far from factual and it was very far from serious. I thank the Secretary of State for their statement and welcome any support for Vauxhall workers and their families who are understandably devastated by Stellantis' decision, especially this close to Christmas. This follows the closure of the Skeff plant in Luton North after a century of manufacturing earlier this year. Like them, Vauxhall is, or was, synonymous with Luton. Stellantis' callous decision will impact our whole town, our whole region even. So what support will be offered to not just the skilled and dedicated Vauxhall workers who are losing their jobs, but also to our whole town as a whole to cope with the loss of this manufacturing giant which Luton helped build?
Tuesday.
Grateful to my honourable friend for her question as well, and echo the sentiments I gave to her constituency neighbour in my earlier question. The timing of this, I think, the whole decision is regrettable, but the timing is particularly regrettable around it. As I said in my statement, we've done everything we can since the new government came into power on the 5th of July to try to avoid this. I reiterated the offers I had made throughout the negotiating process in terms of both policy flexibility and indeed the potential of new government investment in the site, but regrettably it was not possible to change this decision. The support that I have made clear is available. I reiterate that promise, and I do say, despite in fact I would not want to minimise the impact of this in any way. I believe her area is a place of considerable economic strength, firms in engineering and aerospace, in air travel, in the creative industries. There's a lot to be optimistic about for the future, but that doesn't take away the bitterness of this particular blow for Luton at this time. I recognise that.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I make clear that we on this side regard this as a very grave matter? We are taking this seriously and we are also dealing in facts. Yep. Turning then to veracity, can we hear whether or not Stellantis raised the question of the eye-watering ZEV mandate fines? Did they ask for them to be lifted?
I'm grateful to him for his question. Yes, in the conversations we had with them, they raised every aspect of the previous government's policy in terms of the flexibilities, the ability to cap and trade, some of those allowances, what it would mean for the bottom line. And I take those concerns seriously. That's why I'm willing, in a way that does not undermine the destination, to consult on how this policy works alongside my colleague, the Secretary of State for Transport. Because whilst I feel the previous government's aspiration, I understand why they did this policy, I don't think they considered, when the decision was made, the kind of falling demand in Europe which we have seen. And I think we have to work pragmatically across all bits of government to make sure this policy is not having the kind of outcomes which I think many of us who are aware of how exactly this works do share.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer members to my declaration of interest. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement. I'm greatly saddened by the decision. And may I suggest that plant rationalisation, platform rationalisation would have been a major factor. Let's be honest, the industry wanted certainty, but the challenge faced by automotive manufacturers in meeting the ZEV mandate, introduced by the last government, is more stringent than in Europe and most other markets. Put simply, consumer uncertainty was introduced by the last government. So I find the remarks of the Shadow Minister disingenuous. Can I urge the government to introduce more flexibility in the annual targets,
disingenuous is aimed at a particular person. We don't do that. You've been here long enough, and I'm sure you want to withdraw it immediately.
I withdraw that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Can I urge the Government to introduce more flexibility in the annual targets 24 to 29, introduce consumer incentives, and consider redirecting any penalties towards EV charging infrastructure and not to Chinese government car companies?
Secretary of State. I'm grateful to my honourable friend as well. I think he makes some very good points about the fact that whilst nearly every major market has policies of this kind, ours does operate in a different way, say to, for instance, how the French proceeded with theirs. I agree with him that the major failing of the former Prime Minister's speech was to keep this policy in place but change the destination, which really makes no coherence whatsoever. You should do one or the other logically. To do both undermines confidence and still doesn't give the kind of pragmatic flexibilities we're talking about today. And the specific things that he mentioned will all be part of the consultation my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, will lead on.
Sir Julian.
I assure the Secretary of State that the question I'm about to ask I would have put to a Conservative minister equally. And that is this. If all British car manufacturers came together and told the government that they could not possibly meet this 2030 goal, would the government nevertheless persevere in maintaining it as an immovable target?
Well, I would recognise the honourable gentleman's fairness and equity, whichever side of the House he's sitting on, and have no doubts about that. We do listen to industry. We have that very close relationship with them, and that is why we understand that the destination they want is 2030. The pressures of the system are in the next few years because of a situation which I don't believe, and I'm saying this in good faith to Conservative members, I don't believe government ministers at the time considered this set of European and global economic factors in terms of the particular decisions that they made. So that's why we've got to get this balance right. We should also recognise, given we are an export-led automotive producer, that if we weren't being ambitious about the transition, we'd lose our export markets because we wouldn't have anything to sell because other countries have these policies, and that is where the consumer is going. It's about how we support the transition, and that's where we work so closely with industry.
Antonio Batts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw attention to the Register of Interest as a member of Unite the Union. Can I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House today on such a difficult day for the car industry. All of our thoughts are with the workers in Luton today. I wanted to ask the Secretary of State to thank him for the work he's doing, engaging with the industry and with unions on a better way forward on electric vehicle targets. This news is really disappointing, but does the Secretary of State agree with me that we can and should be positive about the future of the automotive industry in this country? It matters to me locally as the MP for many, many businesses in the automotive supply chain, as I know it matters to many members across the House.
I thoroughly agree with the content and sentiment of my honourable friend's question. That support this government is committed to is about that transition, but we should be excited by what British manufacturers are doing. We should be excited by what JLR, what Nissan, what Toyota are doing. We should be excited, I mean, in the supercar, the luxury end of the market from McLaren and Rolls-Royce. I could mention all of our iconic brands. There's a lot of exciting things going on. And if honourable members aren't aware of that, these are all manufacturers more than happy to host members of Parliament coming to visit. So I'd encourage people who aren't aware of the situation to do that. But they will explain the pressures they're under in the short term, and they will endorse the change of policy this government is putting forward today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Electric Vehicles Association say that 14 NGOs, think tanks and campaign groups are advocating to uphold the ZEV mandate. We have just seen the most devastating storms, dangerously accelerated by climate change. I know the government knows that net zero is not negotiable. The previous government has persistently undermined the motor manufacturing industry. Will this government listen to the Electric Vehicle Association, who are, after all, supporting this government in its ambition to get to net zero?
Mr. Speaker, I genuinely appreciate the question from the other perspective, if you like, to this, because it's not just NGOs, there's a big business element that we've been in close contact with about charging infrastructure, and I understand that. And I just want to make clear, that is why we are not undermining the transition. That's why we are ambitious with industry for where we get to. Nothing we are going to propose as a government will itself reduce or limit the deployment of electric vehicles. What I'm talking about, what we are talking about as a government, is looking at how the flexibilities, for instance, in the system operate. So we are doing everything we can alongside industry to get to that destination. So I want nothing to do with the approach from the previous government, which did have a really detrimental effect on the industry, and they will tell any honourable member that very clearly. But I'm listening to what it means to have this, frankly, change in economic circumstances in terms of demand, private demand for electric vehicles, and want to work with industry to get to the place, the destination I think we both strongly support.
Bill Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous government were warned, including multiple times in this chamber, about the damage they were doing to the car industry before the election. The constant changes of policy on net zero, the missing of targets on the rollout of charge points, the failure to even allocate the rapid charge fund, all of these undermined consumer confidence. So can I ask my right honourable friend to make sure that after his review, and as soon as possible, he balances up the needs of manufacturers of cars and vans with the needs of consumers?
Secretary of State.
I believe the analysis of my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I think he and I were in the chamber several occasions where this case was made to the previous government. I mean, look, the intervention from the former Prime Minister was not based in any kind of business or economic logic. It was an attempt to create some sort of wedge issue before the election, which frankly did them absolutely no good because people saw straight through it. I say again, to change the deadline but keep the existing thresholds in place up until 2030 was the worst of all worlds. It did have a really negative impact on consumer confidence, excuse me, and we will never repeat those mistakes.
Gerald Bagot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has said in his statement that at the time of the election, Stellantis were minded to close the plant. But since the election, we've had the budget, which has imposed £25 billion of increased taxes on business. We've had the Employment Rights Bill, which is going to increase costs on business enormously as well. And both of those have directly led to a collapse in business confidence. So does the Secretary of State think those decisions help Stellantis to stay or go?
I can tell them categorically they had no impact whatsoever. And I think the crucial point is, I mean, I hear honourable members from the Conservative Party say this. Do you have any idea about employment conditions in the automotive sector? They're well above the floor the Employment Rights Bill raises this to in the United Kingdom. I mean, get out and talk to industry and have these conversations, please. Look, I'll just be clear. On the wider point he makes on business confidence, I recognise that the absolutely outrageous inheritance this government walked in on, where Conservative members did not plan to even say how they would pay for the existing promises that they made. That created speculation about where that revenue would come from, and I regret the fact we've had to make difficult decisions. I wouldn't ideally want to have to make those decisions, but we are the people fixing the foundations and clearing up the mess the Conservative Party left behind, and there can be no long-term prosperity unless you have a serious government willing to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer to the House to my register of interests. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in paying tribute to my good friend and colleague, the MP for Luton South and South Bedfordshire, who is an absolute fierce champion for her constituents. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the news yesterday only highlights further the urgent need for a UK industrial strategy and demonstrates the challenges that the UK industry faced under the last government without the strategy in place?
Absolutely echo her sentiments in terms of our honourable friends, and agree very much with her statement about a UK industrial strategy. There have been and are particular policies that have been particularly relevant to the automotive sector, but what we have lacked across a whole range of key sectors for a long time in the UK is confidence and certainty that those plans will remain. And when people have talked in this statement about the actions of the previous Prime Minister and that intervention, that is exactly the opposite of what is required when it comes to long-term policy. So the advanced manufacturing sector is one of our 8 sectors in the industrial strategy. It is a sector of tremendous strengths in the United Kingdom, and our intention is to build on that, to grow that, to deliver even more success in future, and that's why it's such a fundamental part of our plans.
Thank you, sir. I commiserate with the workers at Luton who will lose their jobs. If Vauxhall is synonymous with Luton, then Ford is synonymous with Essex. The Minister referred to 800 Ford job losses, including at their research centre at Dunton, where many of my Rayleigh and Wickford constituents work. On electric vehicles specifically, I'm a free trader by instinct, but what China is now doing in that area is way beyond normal competitive practice. They are dumping electric vehicles very cheaply on world markets, a point highlighted by the chairman of the Select Committee. So what specifically are the government intending to do about that to maintain fair competition and to give British companies, including Ford and Vauxhall, a fair chance to compete?
Secretary of State.
First of all, let me reiterate my words about his constituents and the situation at Ford. I would say if anyone, and I have faced this accusation before, thinks somehow the government is only listening to one part of industry or is responding to special pleading, I think the announcement from Ford, followed by what we have had this week from Stellantis, is proof that we do need to move, we do need to listen, we do need to look at some of the policies we've inherited and make sure they're working as they should. I reiterate my comments earlier on in the statement to the chair of the Select Committee. The Trade Remedies Authority and the system that we've inherited, we haven't changed. If Ford or any other company want to make that referral against unfair competitive practices, they can do that. That request has not come from any part of industry to date. And I would say, look, I wouldn't for a second describe the Chinese economy as one that operates on the kind of market principles we would be familiar with. But we've got to be aware that the fundamental threat from China comes from their commitment to research and development, to innovation, to high-tech solutions, and to being able to manufacture on scale. We are kidding ourselves if we think the threat is just somehow unfair competition. This is an economy that has an incredible level of ambition for the future, and that's why we've got to raise our game as well.
Chris Edgley.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents will be impacted by this deeply worrying announcement. So can the Secretary of State confirm what discussions he is having with trade unions on this specific subject and what plans he has to mitigate the job losses on residents in North East Hertfordshire?
Again, I wish to place on record and recognise the situation facing his constituents and the support on offer for the government. He asked specifically about conversations with trade unions. Yes, I can confirm I had several conversations just yesterday with, for instance, the General Secretary of Unite, Sharon Graham, and making sure that what we're doing as a government and what is being negotiated on behalf of the union, the recognised union for the workforce, are consistent with each other. I do recognise that for many people in the local area, the offer of relocation will not be an attractive one. People have links, they have families, they have situations. That is on offer as part of the deal. But as the details of this emerge, I promise the House will keep members of Parliament updated and work very closely with them to ensure it's everything it can be.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be honest, these job losses are a direct result of net zero, the previous government's EV targets, and what we are witnessing. Is the Secretary of State aware? Is he aware that car manufacturers across Europe are losing fortunes on EV production? They are trying to delay targets. And what we are witnessing is just the beginning of the slow, agonising, painful and tragic destruction of hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect jobs in the UK automotive industry.
Secretary of State.
I can certainly agree that we should be honest, and what the honourable gentleman said there was simply not correct, is his characterisation of the UK automotive sector. And all I would ask him to do is don't listen to the government or even the opposition. Go and speak to the industry yourself. Go and speak to the firms involved in this. Ask them about their investment plans. Find out why the honourable gentleman is so out of touch with industry sentiment. Many of the problems in some other European countries have come from a lack of ambition on transition, because fundamentally, if we're selling 80% of what we make in the UK to other markets, there is no long-term market for internal combustion engines. You've got to recognise that and remember. And again, don't take it from the government, take it from industry. But I'm afraid on this one, again, as we had on our exchange, I believe, on steel a few months ago, honourable gentleman's just out of touch with what consumers and business want.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that, unlike the party opposite, this Labour government does not regard the words industrial strategy as anathema? And would he agree that UK industry in general and the automotive sector specifically suffered under the last government due to their laissez-faire, stand-aside approach?
Well, I very much do believe that industrial strategy is essential to the future of the United Kingdom. I still have hope that this will be something which is supported on a cross-party basis. I see no reason why Conservative members or anyone else would not support industrial strategy, and there have been Conservatives who've held the position or the predecessor positions to the one I hold who actually got this and believed in it, and I think did quite a good job in some quite difficult circumstances within the Conservative Party to do it. So yes, it's essential to this government, but I certainly hope the whole House will get behind our plans for Invest 2035, because the response from industry has been superb. It is what we need as a country, and we should all get behind that.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly it's a sad day for Luton and the workers there. But what the Secretary of State needs to remember is, of course, that this is not just about Luton, it's about the complete car manufacturing industry in this country. And there'll be workers up and down the country in the industry saying, am I going to be next? So can the Secretary of State set out his position on the conversations that he's having with other car manufacturers to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to them?
Well, I reiterate the points I made in my statement that this is about the whole sector, that whilst we had a position that we walked in to find in relation to this particular plant on the 5th of July when we formed the government, I recognise that alongside that particular issue, there are sector-wide issues here, which is why we've been having these conversations, and it's why we're willing to show the pragmatism we had in changing what we've inherited in terms of some of these policies to make sure they're working in a way which works for British industry. So you asked about specific conversations we've had. I said in my statement we had a meeting with all the major UK-based OEMs and wider representatives of the sector just last week to talk about the kind of flexibilities that might be required in order to make this policy work in a way which doesn't undermine British industry, but gets us to the common destination industry and government and consumers hold together. So that is exactly what we are doing, and I would ask Conservative members, wherever they feel about the previous government's policy, to get behind that ambition too.
Tessa Munn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Success in transition to electrical vehicles is vital for the West Country and for Somerset in particular, with the new Agratas battery plant which is coming to Somerset, and actually the Port of Bristol, through which 500,000 vehicles a year go. Will the Secretary of State act to support consumers and consumer confidence through restoring the plug-in grant, please?
Secretary of State.
I can certainly assure my honourable member that I will do everything I can to bolster consumer confidence. I say all the time, the products made in the United Kingdom are great. If people, again, are unaware of just how great they are, go and book yourselves a test drive, go and visit the production lines, go and see how brilliant it is. The Agratas factory is an incredible investment. It will be a significant part. I've always said, for the long-term future of this particular sector, we must make the batteries in the United Kingdom. Ultimately, vehicles over the long term will be made where the batteries are made, and we've got to recognise that's a key part of the industrial strategy for this sector that needs to go forward. I can't make a particular announcement on the plug-in grant. As you will know, it's not within the Department of Business and Trade, but I can confirm to her that across government, whether it is the Treasury, whether it is the Department for Transport, the Department for Energy and Net Zero, we are all united in wanting to make this transition a success and willing to listen to honourable members like yourself and industry as to the policies necessary to do that.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And in the Secretary of State's statement, he mentioned those job losses also at Ford at Dunton in my constituency. And can I thank the Shadow Minister, the MP for Croydon West, for speaking to me on the phone earlier this week about those job losses. I very much welcome the fast track of the review that the Secretary of State is putting forwards, but I also agree with my right honourable friend, the member for Raleigh and Wickford and the chair of the Select Committee, that we really do need to look after the manufacturers I've spoken to about the Chinese electric car dumping potentially in the UK, and anything that, can he speak to that? But can he also answer as to whether concerns have also been raised with me from local car manufacturers about the increase in vehicle excise duty on some models in the budget, and if there is any possibility of perhaps looking at some of those issues again, because that is also having an impact on some of the demand for these vehicles in the UK.
Thank the honourable member for his question, and I'm grateful we've been able to get him some time with ministers about the serious situation affecting his constituents, which members of this government will always take seriously, as I do believe previous government ministers have under the previous administration. The particular issue around vehicle excise duty, I think he's referring to in the budget. Obviously, a question really for the Treasury and the Chancellor, but the differential that exists from the changes in the budget between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles is actually one of the demand incentives that now exists within the system for it. So I think everyone would recognise government should be doing everything it can to support industry around this transition, and measures like that are part of the answer. But of course, if he's got specific concerns, we'd always be willing to listen to those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State was very robust in his criticism of the previous government and their approach to ZEV mandate. But wasn't the Secretary of State one of 141 Labour MPs who voted for that ZEV mandate?
Secretary of State.
Absolutely clear. The ZEV mandate that the previous Conservative government put forward, we worked constructively with them, and I believe in incentives towards the transition. I'm not arguing against that. It was the sheer brass neck that I reacted to of the opposition front bench for somehow not even recognising it was their policy that we were willing to change, and presenting it as if the argument was the other way round. So I will be quite robust when the facts are as the facts are, and the opposition front bench aren't willing to accept that. But look, I say again, we want this transition to work. It's not about the destination. It's not about, particularly even in this regard, the thresholds. It's about the flexibilities, how the policy operates, what it is currently meaning for market conditions in the United Kingdom. I think that is an entirely reasonable and proper response to what we have found walking through the door as a new government. And again, I see no reason why people can't pragmatically get on board and support that.
Lisa Smart.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things that's stopping some of my constituents from transitioning to electric vehicles is a lack of access to charging points. He will know, as a constituency neighbour, that some of the housing stock in my patch lends itself more easily to personalised charging points than others. So what more can the government do to ensure everyone can access charging points to make the transition to EVs?
Absolutely agree that that is one of the concerns consumers have. I think that the principal concern for consumers on EV take-up is the cost of the vehicle itself, but this is, and she will know from our constituencies, it is difficult in some places to envisage the kind of infrastructure some people might take for granted in areas that have more capacity to have that built into properties and driveways. There are about 70,000 public chargers, EV chargers in the United Kingdom. It's important to recognise there's not always an equity across different parts of the country around that, but a lot of people are surprised to learn. I think we have more public chargers than, for instance, Norway has, which is very much the leader in electric vehicle rollout. There was specific money in the budget to expand the rollout of charge points, to build on that 70,000 already in place. But I think she's right to say it's a key concern to be taken into consideration, not just the overall number, but the equity of those around the country. I can promise that the Department of Transport's interested in that too.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement, and in particular for his honesty. It's important to have that, and whenever we look at the bleak things we have before us, and thank him for that. The Minister will understand that with the cost of living crisis that our constituents are struggling through, the last thing on their mind is to afford, forgive me, an all-singing, all-dancing electric car when they're clearly struggling to pay their electric bill. The closure of the plant, which specifically highlights the lack of passion for electric cars, can come as no surprise. So what can government and the Minister do to make electric cars affordable for everyone, which would, I believe, enhance the need for car manufacturers once again? Thank you so much.
I'm grateful to him for his question in the way that he has put it. He's right to say cost of living concerns are paramount. I think we've got to recognise as well the cost of petrol and diesel is often, many times, a key consideration in overall household finances. But he asked specifically, what can we do to bring down the cost of that? Now, that is about co-investing with industry in the most efficient forms of production. I think he mentions an all-singing, all-dancing EV. There's a whole range of vehicles available, and actually many of our producers have led on the kind of family cars. I mean, the Nissan Leaf is a great example of that, made by some of my former school friends in Sunderland. We should get behind that and talk about how great those products are. But fundamentally, we do need to bring down the cost, not just of the charging infrastructure, but of the unit cost itself. That can only be done by investment in efficient production and scale production. And that's why the destination is so important. But working with industry on that destination is key to delivering the outcomes I think he and I want.
That concludes that statement. We'll just give the front benches a few moments to swap over for the next statement. The Minister, Dame Diana Johnson, for the next statement. Minister.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I will make a statement on this government's action to tackle antisocial behaviour. From residential neighbourhoods to busy high streets, from rolling countryside to city centres, from idyllic villages to bustling towns, the places of Britain should be a source of local pride. As well as being safe, they should feel safe for those who live and work in them. Yet the dismal reality is that in too many areas, the opposite is true. In the last year of the previous government, shop theft soared by 29% to a 20-year high. Street theft surged by 40%, and antisocial behaviour reached new heights in our towns and cities. That is the Conservative Party's legacy on law and order. Yeah. Up and down the country, people feel uneasy or even unsafe. Unruly gangs roam the streets, creating intimidation and fear. Noisy off-road vehicles speed around, disturbing the peace. Illegal drugs are abused with brazenness. Public spaces are awash with litter and graffiti. And an epidemic of shop theft is plaguing retailers, big and small, while their staff are subjected to intolerable levels of abuse and violence. At its core, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is about respect. Respect between citizens, respect for our society and the expectations underpinning it, and respect for the rule of law. All of these are woven into the fabric of our democracy. But after years of neglect, that fabric has become worn. And we saw a disgraceful illustration of that in the summer, when serious disorder erupted in some towns and cities. And we see it on a smaller scale every day as decent, law-abiding people suffer due to the selfishness of others. More than a third of people, 36% in England and Wales, report experiencing or witnessing some type of antisocial behaviour in their local area, while around 1 million incidents of antisocial behaviour were recorded by police in the year to June 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must never make the mistake of dismissing this menace as low-level or trivial. To do so would be an insult to the victims. And it may manifest itself in different ways in different areas, but wherever and however it occurs, there is an adverse impact on neighbourhoods and on communities. Antisocial behaviour chips away at people's sense of pride and confidence in their local area. It ruins their enjoyment of public spaces, and for those affected by the most serious and persistent cases, their quality of life is damaged. One victim, quoted in a report on antisocial behaviour published recently by the Victims Commissioner, said this: "Every day I'm crying. It makes me anxious, and it actually makes me physically sick." And another said, "It's totally isolating, and nobody can understand the pressure it puts on you." Now, I am sure that all members across the House will be familiar with accounts like these from the all too frequent interactions that we have with our constituents on these issues. And earlier this month, I visited Leighton in East London, where I heard from local councillors about the importance of partners working together to tackle antisocial behaviour. And more recently, the Home Secretary and I met with victims of antisocial behaviour and shop theft, Annie Valentine and Brian Roberts from Blackpool and Tim Nye from Sheffield, to hear about their concerns firsthand. Madam Deputy, this can be done, and this government will not stand for it. And that is why the Prime Minister has made safer streets a central pillar of our agenda for change. A key part of that mission is the work the Home Secretary is leading alongside police to put visible neighbourhood policing back at the heart of our communities. By restoring that crucial link between the police forces and the people they serve, we will ensure that residents and businesses have the reassurance that they want and need, as well as deterring would-be offenders. And as we implement our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we are determined to tackle antisocial behaviour head-on. I can today update the House on that work. To turn things around and effectively combat the problem, it is really clear that fresh impetus is needed, which is why, in our manifesto, we committed to introducing respect orders. These will enable tough restrictions to be placed on the worst adult perpetrators of antisocial behaviour. Those subject to a respect order could be banned from a town centre, as well as being compelled to address the root cause of their behaviour, for example, through mandated alcohol and drug treatment. The orders will be applied for by the police, by councils or by social housing providers and issued by the courts. Importantly, there will be a power of arrest available for all suspected breaches, protecting communities and town centres from further harm. And we are going even further by ensuring that anyone who breaches their respect order commits a criminal offence and may face up to 2 years imprisonment, an unlimited fine or a community order. These new powers will be piloted first to ensure that they are as effective as possible. We are also going to crack down on the scourge of off-road bikes in public parks, dangerous e-scooters on pavements and street racing, all of which inflict misery on local communities. Under strengthened police powers, officers will no longer be required to issue a warning before seizing vehicles involved in antisocial behaviour. Now, turning to retail crime, it harms lives and livelihoods, and it has to be dealt with as the serious threat that it is. So we will introduce a new specific offence of assaulting a retail worker, and we will end the effective immunity for shop theft of goods under £200. Madam Deputy Speaker, the task of making our country safer will not be completed overnight, but this is a government of action. The work of change is underway, and as we step up this vital effort, we are guided by a simple and unshakable belief. The belief that our streets belong to the decent, law-abiding majority. Because for far too long, gangs, yobs and thieves have been running amok. And that's not going to happen anymore, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under this government, the safety and the security of the public will always come first, and we will be unrelenting in our mission to restore respect and take back our streets. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Minister, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for her statement and for advance sight of it. It's not right that anyone should live in fear of intimidation in the place they call home. Antisocial behaviour has real consequences. It can ruin communities and prevent people from making the most of their local area. Antisocial behaviour can make women and girls feel unsafe walking home at night, and it can have a huge impact on shops and businesses if customers are left feeling unsafe visiting their high streets and town centres. We, of course, welcome any focus on antisocial behaviour and efforts to tackle it. But tackling it requires more than a press release or a rebrand. I know that those in the sector have described the proposed respect orders as wholly unnecessary and near identical to existing powers already held by the police. We will, of course, engage with the government as proposals are brought forward, but are keen to see meaningful action rather than just the renaming of public space protection orders and criminal behaviour orders. Changing names won't change outcomes. The last government launched the Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan, backed by £160 million worth of funding and over 100,000 hours of police and other uniformed patrols undertaken to target antisocial behaviour hotspots. As of February 2024, our plan led to nearly 600 additional arrests, close to 1,500 stop and searches and around 700 uses of antisocial behaviour powers such as community protection orders and public protection orders. My own Labour Police and Crime Commissioner in Cleveland has commended the huge contribution made by the last government's hotspot policing initiative. Uniform patrols delivered by local authority wardens in Cleveland clocked up a total of 7,685 hours on the streets of Stockton, Hartlepool, Middlesbrough and Redcar. As a result, between September 23 and August 24, police report incidents of antisocial behaviour were down by 21% in hotspot areas. We also banned nitrous oxide, increased fines for fly tipping, littering and graffiti, all of which is a blight on our communities. The Conservative government made sure the police had the tools to discourage antisocial behaviour and dedicated funding to support police and crime commissioners to target enforcement in the areas where antisocial behaviour is most prevalent. The police play a vital role in tackling antisocial behaviour and keeping our communities safe. The Conservative government invested over £3 billion, including additional funding each year, and that rolled into government grants to enable the recruitment of 20,000 additional police officers. A government priority and a manifesto commitment. That meant, by March this year, the police headcount hit 149,769, a record number of police, and 3,000 higher than previous records. Last year, the Conservative government arranged a £922 million increase for funding for frontline policing for this financial year, something I hope will be matched next year. Does the Minister agree that in order to tackle antisocial behaviour, we must ensure the police have the necessary resources and support? The Right Honourable Lady spoke about Labour's manifesto commitment to provide 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials, but has failed to set out any of the detail behind when these officers will be recruited, which forces will receive these additional officers. Can the Minister also explain how these respect orders will be different to the failed ASBOs, or how they'll be different to the existing orders, such as public space protection orders or criminal behaviour orders? Our action plan puts safety, security and a basic respect for others at its heart. Will she commit to continue the Hotspot Police Initiative, especially as we can already see the results across the country? I know I've asked it before, but I never quite managed to get an answer. The last government increased funding for frontline policing by £922 million for this year. Will the government match that increase next year? Thank you.
Minister. Well, I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for his opening comments when he acknowledged the effect that antisocial behaviour can have on communities and on individuals. But then I think during the rest of his response, he seemed to have lapsed back into that condition that seems to affect a number of honourable and right honourable members on that side of the House, which seems to be amnesia about what happened over the course of the 14 years that they were in power and the vicious cuts that policing saw, over 20,000 police officers cut and thousands of police staff during that period. So I do think trying to kind of ignore the legacy that we've inherited and are having to deal with today is really not a satisfactory way of going on from the dispatch box. If I can also just say to him that I'm going to answer the questions if the Shadow Minister will give me an opportunity to do so. So I do think a little bit of courtesy in the House is helpful. We are talking about antisocial behaviour, and a number of my comments were about respect, which is very important in this House.
Can we have less noise and heckling from the backbenches, Minister?
I've always tried to be respectful to all members of this House, and I will now try and deal with some of the points that have been made by the Shadow Minister. I think the most important point, perhaps, for the Shadow Minister to understand is that respect orders are different to criminal behaviour orders. I don't think he's quite understood that. Criminal behaviour orders are attached to where there's been a conviction, and the CPS then apply in court for that criminal behaviour order to be applied. Respect orders will not require a conviction. They will be made on application, as I said, by councils, social housing providers, the police, to court. There will be a power of arrest attached if they are breached, and that individual will be brought before the magistrate's court if that breach happens. So they are different to a criminal behaviour order. They're also different in the sense that they are not around community protection notices, which I think the Shadow Minister referred to, which are really for lower level environmental antisocial behaviour issues. I think respect orders the conversations I've had with individuals in the sector and organisations that work in this field, respect orders are getting a lot of support. We want to pilot them. We want to make sure that they're going to work fully when we bring them in across the country. So I am confident that they provide us with the flexibility of the civil injunction, which is what actually sits there at the moment in terms of dealing with antisocial behaviour. But of course, if you breach a civil injunction, then the police officer has to take the individual to court to prove the breach. So there's no automatic power of arrest. And that's the difference that you'll have with the respect order. But I do think it combines the flexibility of the civil injunction with the teeth of the criminal behaviour order. And I hope that explains to the Shadow Minister why respect orders, I think, are a very positive development in dealing with antisocial behaviour.
Chair of the Education Select Committee, Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the measures the Minister has set out today and the Government's commitment to tackling antisocial behaviour, which is an urgent issue in my constituency, particularly in our town centres. But the most urgent issue that we face in tackling these issues is the number of police officers. My honourable friend will be aware that the previous government allocated funding for recruitment of police officers and then withdrew it when the Met was unable to meet its target due to a set of unique challenges in London. Can I ask my honourable friend for her firm assurance that the unique challenges facing the Met are fully understood and that the government will provide them with the resources they need to tackle this very serious issue in our communities?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. And of course, the Met are almost a quarter, I think, of policing overall. So they play a very important part in policing London, but also they have other responsibilities at a national level, responsibilities for counter-terrorism, etc. So they are very important. The decisions around funding are being taken at the moment. The House will be informed in the normal way next month about the provisional settlements around policing, but I hear very, very clearly the concerns of my honourable friend.
I'll go to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart, who knows she has a maximum of 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Across my constituency, whether it's in Heatherley, Woodley, Marple or High Lane, illegal off-road bikers are a persistent blight on the community. They're intimidating people, endangering public safety and being generally noisy, antisocial and really annoying. So I was interested to read the Home Secretary's comments on respect orders over the weekend and to read the Minister's statement today, and I thank her for advance sight. My local Greater Manchester police officers tell me the challenge in tackling these off-road bikes, often ridden by young people, isn't a lack of powers, but it's the difficulty of gathering evidence and the tools to identify and actually catch offenders who often evade them on these bikes. So how will the government ensure that local police have the time, resources and practical support needed to enforce these new measures effectively? We already know what's most effective at stopping crime, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's proper community policing where officers are visible, trusted and out and about in their local neighbourhoods. Bobbies on the beat, knowing their community, preventing crime every day. The previous Conservative government decimated frontline police numbers, leaving local forces overstretched and making our communities less safe. So I would welcome details from the Minister on how the government plans to address this, particularly cuts to police community support officer numbers who play a crucial role in tackling antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for those comments and the questions, and I think this issue around off-road bikes and e-bikes and all the problems that they're causing, the specific issue that we want to address first of all is to give the police the powers that they need to deal with the antisocial behaviour that's being caused by these bikes and off-road bikes and e-bikes. I think the points that the Honourable Lady is making in terms of what else the police need to be able to make sure they can implement those changes effectively. I will contact the Honourable Lady with more details on that, and I will certainly talk to the police about what more we can do to support them. As to the neighbourhood policing guarantee and our commitment to put 13,000 police officers, PCSOs and specials into our neighbourhoods, the Honourable Lady, I'm sure, will recognise that we are 5 months in to this government. We are working as hard as we can to get the plans in place. We are doing this with policing. We want to make sure that they are with us on this, and we've got everything set up to allow that to happen smoothly. So those announcements will be made in due course. But I just want to reassure the House that is probably my #1 priority to make that happen.
Marsha Di Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by welcoming the government's plans to introduce these respect orders to tackle the scourge of anti-social behaviour? I hear from my constituents in Battersea all the time sharing their concerns and their worries about antisocial behaviour in parts of our community. But I ask the Minister whether she can confirm that these new orders will also include public drinking and drug use to ensure that our communities are safe and free from harm and nuisance.
Yes, so my honourable friend is absolutely right. Issues like street drinking and taking drugs, these are issues that we want to address. So the whole idea of a respect order will be restrictive in the sense that an individual may be told that they can no longer be in a certain area in the high street or in a town centre or in a park, for example. But there will also be positive conditions that will be attached. For example, if there are issues around the way they are street drinking, that there may be alcohol courses that they can go on for addiction or for drug addiction treatment and courses, and for anger, that there may be courses that's appropriate. So you're dealing with the actual problem in the area, but you're also trying to treat the underlying issue with the individual who's causing the antisocial behaviour.
Dr Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Certainly support the Minister's intent in bringing this forward, but I'm still struggling to understand what the material difference is between these orders and antisocial behaviour orders. If it is the case that they're materially different, could the Minister say in what respects they are? And will she say to what extent this will be based upon perception by a complainant? For example, in non-crime hate incidents recently, we've had considerable controversy around perception of an allegation and its effects, which has caused all manner of problems and bogged the police down in a whole load of controversy. And I'm sure she would want to avoid that in respect of this particular measure.
Minister.
Well, if I just said, first of all, to the Right Honourable Gentleman that in 2014, there were changes to antisocial behaviour legislation. In fact, they were weakened. And I think that was a combination of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in coalition at that time. They decided to weaken the antisocial behaviour powers that the previous Labour government had brought in. So I think that's the first thing to mention. So what we've ended up with are the civil injunctions. And as I tried to explain earlier on, and perhaps I need to do it again and be a little bit clearer, civil injunctions can be issued for antisocial behaviour, but if they are breached by someone in a town centre or in a high street behaving in an antisocial way, the police have to go to court to prove the breach. That's the issue. So they can't be arrested. The antisocial behaviour cannot be stopped at that point. There is a process that has to be gone through. With the respect order, there will be an automatic arrest for breach, which means action can be taken far quicker. So that's the key point. The criminal behaviour orders, which we were discussing earlier as well, they can only be attached to someone who has been convicted. What these are about are trying to nip the antisocial behaviour that's causing, and the definition that's used is harassment, alarm or distress. So that's the level you're at in order to be able to apply for a respect order. So I hope that explains to the Right Honourable Gentleman the difference and why we think this is the way to go forward to deal with things through arrest and get people in front of the court if they are breaching respect orders.
I say to the Minister, detailed answers are very well enjoyed here, but we've got a lot of people to get into this statement. I call the Home Affairs Select Committee member, Sean Davies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In a recent survey of residents in Telford, it was overwhelmingly clear that they'd had enough of the inaction over the last 14 years. And I welcome the respect orders coming onto the toolkit for the police officers. Can the Minister confirm that it will give the power to authorities to seize and crush off-road bikes, seize booze off drunken yobs, and deal with those who consume drugs on our town centres. And also, Madam Deputy Speaker, a return to neighbourhood policing so we get coppers back onto the streets patrolling their communities.
Instruction from Madam Deputy Speaker. So I can absolutely say this is about rebuilding that neighbourhood presence, having those police officers, PCSOs and specials back in our communities, and dealing with exactly the issues that my honourable friend has raised around people drinking, taking drugs, riding vehicles and causing harassment, alarm and distress.
Select Committee Member Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her statement and warmly welcome it? Can I also ask her whether, if she's right to mention neighbourhood policing, can I ask her whether she agrees with the Met Commissioner, Mark Rowley, that local police stations are critical to neighbourhood policing, and whether she will pledge to stop the closure of local police stations that occurred under the Conservatives and previous Labour administrations, including Wimbledon Police Station, which remains under threat 6 years after I won my judicial review stopping its closure.
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that where police stations are located and how many there are a matter for police and crime commissioners, or in the case of the Metropolitan Police, for the Mayor of London and the Deputy Mayor to make those decisions. Those are not decisions that I would be involved in or any government would be involved in. They are operational decisions for PCCs and the Mayor.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I wholeheartedly welcome my honourable friend's statement today. Every week I meet residents who, very sadly, have their lives disturbed and sometimes even ruined by appalling crime and antisocial behaviour, and I'm delighted that she's bringing forward these clearly well thought through and well explained measures today. My question for her would be, though, would she perhaps consider Reading as for one of the pilot schemes in this very important set of measures?
Minister.
There are many honourable and right honourable members who are pitching to be one of the pilots, and I will certainly add Reading to the list.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Antisocial behaviour affects all of our constituencies, including mine of Broxbourne. Some antisocial behaviour can be very localised down a specific street, in a block of flats or between neighbours. And some of those levers to solve that antisocial behaviour lie with housing associations. Can the Minister outline how we can bring housing associations to the table, as they will play a key role in solving and tackling antisocial behaviour?
Minister.
And as I said in my remarks, housing associations and social housing providers will be able to apply for respect orders. I ought to say as well that the civil injunctions which exist at the moment will be renamed as housing injunctions, and that again will be dealing with that more low-level housing between neighbours, antisocial behaviour between neighbours that housing associations might want to use as well. But they'll be able to use both respect orders and housing injunctions.
Clive Efford.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. And does she agree with me that the biggest boost to antisocial behaviour we've seen in recent times was the cut of 21,000 police officers by the previous Tory government, which resulted in a decimation of our local safer neighbourhood police teams? And I really welcome her commitment to bringing them back. But in addition to that, the London-hating Conservatives opposite cut the London police budget, so much so that we have a black hole in the budget now, which is forcing the Commissioner to cut officers. Now, can she give me an assurance that she's aware of that and that she will address that, so that we can start to put these safer neighbourhood teams back where my constituency in Eltham and Chislehurst want to see them?
I think it's always very helpful to have experienced and long-standing members of Parliament to remind us of what's actually happened, because, as I pointed out earlier on, there seems to be amnesia on parts of the benches opposite.
Sir Julian Lewis.
An estimated 60,000 hours of police time was spent on non-crime hate incidents in the past 12 months. And we already hear about burglaries not being investigated for lack of police time. So whilst welcoming the description of the problem, how is it to be solved unless chief constables are to be directed to reorder their priorities?
Minister.
I think the government has made it very clear what our priorities are for policing. So protecting the public, as I talked about today, rebuilding neighbourhood policing, tackling town centre crime, tackling antisocial behaviour, tackling the scourge of knife crime and halving violence against women and girls in the next decade. We've been very clear on that. The Home Secretary has also been very clear about the common sense approach that needs to be adopted when you're dealing with non-crime hate incidents. And we are working with HMIC, FRS and the College of Policing on how best that can be done. And it's vital, though, I think the right honourable gentleman will agree, that police forces are able to track and monitor information, intelligence that might be helpful if there is going to be further criminal activity or serious social harm and community cohesion is going to be affected. And capturing that is something that police forces need to do.
Sally Jameson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Doncaster, along with many other areas across the country, antisocial behaviour, fly tipping, shoplifting and off-road bikes are blighting our communities and our high streets. And as a former prison officer myself, I know that dealing with these issues, it is critical that we tackle the causes and pathways to crime in the first place. So can I ask what the government are doing to make it a priority to deal with tackling the causes as well as the crimes itself?
And can I welcome my honourable friend, because I think her experience as a former prison officer will be invaluable in this place in bringing that knowledge to share in our debates. And she's absolutely right. The issue around prevention, which has been ignored, I think, for too long, is really important. And that's why we are going to, particularly around young people, set up the Young Futures programme, the youth hubs, to, as the Home Secretary talks about, wrap our arms around those teenagers who might be getting into trouble, making the wrong decisions, getting involved in things that they shouldn't, and having that preventative pathway to make sure that those young people start to take the right steps forward.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent Linda is, along with other members of my community, extremely concerned about antisocial behaviour in Burgess Hill. Car racing, e-scooters and bike thefts are causing distress and fear to residents across the town. And as the Minister noted in her statement, the impacts of this should not be minimised. I've raised this with both Sussex Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. So what can the Minister do to ensure that Sussex Police have sufficient resources to stop a small number of perpetrators from having a disproportionate effect upon law-abiding constituents across mid-Sussex?
Sussex Member of Parliament are listening very closely to the Minister.
Well, the announcements around the provisional police settlement will be made in the usual way, which will be next month. Could I just say, though, the Home Secretary has already indicated that there will be an additional £500 million pounds made available to policing. That has already been announced. But in terms of the direct figures for Sussex, I'm afraid the Honourable Lady and Madam Deputy Speaker will just have to wait a few more days.
Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I never thought I would see the day that we would have Conservative members of Parliament arguing against more powers to increase the safety in our communities up and down the country. It is absolutely gobsmacking, and I, for one, absolutely support what the Minister, the Minister is bringing in today in respect of these respect orders. And I know that my constituents in Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes do feel the impact of antisocial behaviour very, very keenly, but they will want some assurance from the Minister that there will be sufficient police and PCSOs available to issue these respect orders in a timely manner. Can she do that, please?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that question. I think it is rather odd that the picture that's been painted by the opposition is that all the powers are there, so everything's fine. Why do we need to change things? When it's quite clear to, I think, the vast majority of people that things aren't fine and that the powers and the legislation isn't working as we need it to. So that's why we are bringing forward these additional respect orders, and also the neighbourhood policing guarantee, the 13,000 police officers, specials and PCSOs that we want to have back in our community to actually use the legislation and get the antisocial behaviour under control.
Badenoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Antisocial behaviour is a blight on our communities, and I agree that police should be given the resources to tackle it. In my Huntingdon constituency, Cambridgeshire Constabulary are overstretched.
In the past week, the Policing Minister has twice dismissed my question as to whether she would review the police allocation formula so that they receive their fair share of funding. And my constituents have noticed. Will she review the formula? And if not, how will the government meet their guarantee for neighbourhood policing?
Minister.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, I haven't dismissed anything. I'm very conscious and I take my responsibilities seriously about the allocation of resources for policing. We have been in power 5 months. We have to announce next month the provisional police settlement for 25-26, and those figures will be announced in a few weeks' time. As to whether we want to look longer term at resources, of course we keep that all under review. But I think for the moment, the thing I think most MPs are concerned about is the allocation for next year. That's the thing I'm working on at the moment. That's the thing the Home Secretary is working on. We are trying to do our best, and the Home Secretary has already announced an additional £500 million for policing.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that an important component of making sure that our streets belong to law-abiding citizens is the good work of councils such as mine, for example in providing highly professional community wardens with enforcement powers, working in partnership with bid rangers and the police? And would she agree perhaps that this innovative approach to the anti-ASB ecosystem might lend itself to rugby being high up the list to be a pilot?
Minister.
Well, I'll certainly add rugby to the list, and I think my honourable friend makes a very important point about how this cannot just be done with the police alone. It has to be done alongside councils. I commend the use of community wardens. I think they're a great resource to communities in dealing with antisocial behaviour, but also we know social housing providers are also key to this. So this has to be about partnership working.
Matt Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the commitment to neighbourhood policing that will help Cheltenham fight its problems with graffiti and illegal e-bikes. But when I talk to the Police Commissioner in my area, he warns me that he's expecting to have to work very hard to maintain the force's current headcount because of budgetary pressures in the coming year. So I wonder whether the Minister can explain the apparent disconnect between those concerns of the Commissioner locally and the government's statements today.
Minister.
Well, I don't think anybody is pretending that we have inherited a positive, rosy economic settlement from the previous government. We're having to make difficult decisions and tough choices. But what's very clear is that the security and safety of the British people is the #1 issue for this government, and the Home Secretary, as I've said now I think 3 times, has already said there is additional funding for policing next year. There was additional funding that was put into police forces up and down the country this year to fund the pay increase to police officers, which had not been in the budget that the previous government had set for this year. So we've already put additional money in, and we will be doing so next year as well.
Olivia Bailey.
A menace, an absolute menace for my constituents in Tilehurst and across Reading West and Mid-Berkshire. I'd like to welcome the tough and swift action the government's taking on illegal bikes and antisocial behaviour, something which the members opposite clearly were far too relaxed about in government. And I'd like to, along with associating myself with a request from the Honourable Member for Reading Central, ask the Minister if she would tell me whether there be new powers for the police to seize the bikes, get them off our streets and tackle the terrible problem of illegal bikes.
Minister.
And I hear very clearly this is a problem up and down the country around those bikes, those off-road motorbikes as well, and we are looking at that. But what we can announce today is that we are going to get rid of that requirement of a warning first of all, but we are certainly looking at what else we need to do to make sure that this is dealt with properly by the police.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's commitment to tackling antisocial behaviour. There's a particular problem in my constituency in the 4th Street of Bridgewater, where those who abuse drugs and alcohol gather and cause a nuisance of themselves. So would she please consider adding Bridgewater to her list of possible candidates for the pilot scheme?
Well, I have to say I'm very pleased to hear a Conservative Member of Parliament wanting to be added to our list of pilots for respect orders, so I'll certainly do that.
Antonia Vance.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
and I wish to associate myself with the comments that have been made about the scourge of illegal motorbikes. They are a particular scourge in communities across Tipton, Wednesbury and Coseley. One of my favourite pledges in the Labour Party's manifesto was the pledge to crush those bikes within 48 hours and seize them without notice. And can the Minister tell us how soon are we going to get on with crushing the bikes?
Yeah. Minister, Kev?
Well, today I'm able to say that we are going to do that, but the actual details and the timetable, the Honourable Lady will have to wait a little bit longer for, but that's certainly my intention.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I welcome much of what was in your statement. In my constituency of Ely and East Cambridgeshire, shoplifting is a significant problem, and recently I've been talking to shop workers in Littleport and Ely about how threatened they feel and how stressful it is. And so what I would like to understand is, what is the Minister going to do to ensure that our local police, who we've already heard are very stretched, have the resources and the capacity to attend and deal with the criminals when there is a shoplifting event?
Esther.
One of the things I often hear from shopkeepers and shop workers is that they don't report shoplifting and shop theft because they think no one will come, nothing will be done. And that's one of the reasons why the neighbourhood policing guarantee, having police officers back into our high streets and town centres and village centres, is so important, because those shop workers and shop owners will know that there is a visible police presence to deter, but also to deal with those who try to shoplift, and action will be taken against them. And there will be consequences for people who steal. Getting rid of that £200 threshold and saying, if you steal, that is a criminal offence and there are consequences. Just as we saw in the summer with the riots and people in my own constituency in Hull looting in shops, thinking there were no consequences. There are consequences for theft.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently held a public meeting on the concerning rise of antisocial behaviour in Haxby, and I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor for York and North Yorkshire, Joe Coles, Haxby Town Council, the police and the local community for their efforts. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that respect orders could play a key role in reducing antisocial behaviour in the town, and will she meet with me to discuss the case in more detail?
Minister.
Yes, of course, I'd be delighted to meet with my honourable friend, and I think that indicates again the role of partnership working to deal with antisocial behaviour.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Rural crime is defined as crime and antisocial behaviour occurring in rural areas, which is very logical. But in my own region, just 0.24% of staff in the local police force are dedicated to rural crime units, despite the significant impact this has on local communities in places like Brecon and Astragunlais. Does the Minister agree with Liberal Democrat proposals that every police force should have a specialist coordinator in their rural crime team, in line with recommendations from the National Rural Crime Network?
Yeah.
Well, I take crime, either urban crime or rural crime, very seriously, and that's why, for example, the neighbourhood policing guarantee isn't just about urban areas, it has to be in rural areas as well. Those people who live in rural areas need to know that when they need the police will come, and that there is a presence in their communities. So I'm very happy to discuss further with the honourable gentleman the issue of rural crime if there are specific things he would like to discuss with me, but I do take it seriously.
Josh Simons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since I was elected, there's been a constant stream of antisocial behaviour incidents across the towns I represent. Hindley Town Football Club, Ashton Athletic, Plattbridge, Winstanley. It really dents the pride, as the Minister said, that people feel in the towns that they live in. So can I ask the Minister if she agrees with me that the capacity for councils and housing associations to issue and apply for these respect orders is a vital part of the new powers she's announced today?
Minister.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that question from my honourable friend. I think it's, again, around recognising this is not just the police. This has to be councils, social housing providers and other agencies that are going to tackle together the scourge of antisocial behaviour.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister very much for her statement today. Does the Minister not agree that antisocial behaviour is a plague across the United Kingdom, and that the remedy lies across a few departments, and obviously an increase in community policing is vital? But so too, Minister, is youth sector funding to create safe spaces for our young people. And would the Minister agree with me that we need investment across multiple departments, from policing to education and to communities? And with this being the case, what discussions has the Minister been able to have with her Cabinet colleagues to ascertain if a joined-up approach could be more effective? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman has very eloquently expressed the role of the mission-led government that this party is taking forward. So the mission around safer streets, which has antisocial behaviour within that, is cross-government. It's not just about the Home Office, although we are the lead government body for this. It has to encompass all the other parts of government, and it has to encompass local authorities as well, and as I've been saying, housing providers, but it has to be partnership and it has to be cross-government.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Antisocial behaviour is sadly a blight on our town centre in St Austell, but also many of the smaller clay country villages in my constituency. So I welcome the Minister's announcement of respect orders. I very much welcome them to pilot them in St Austell, should they wish to do so. And on that note, what impact does the Minister expect these respect orders to have in revitalising our once thriving town centres?
Minister.
Well, I'll add my honourable friend's constituency to the list, first of all. And I think the reason we want to pilot these respect orders is to see what's working and what the effect is. But we are confident that by being able to arrest if someone breaches a respect order, that will speed things up. Because one of the complaints is that when people are subject to antisocial behaviour orders at the moment, there has to be a long process going to court, proving the breach. This is about arresting and dealing with the person who breaches that order quickly.
Lindsay Farnsworth.
I welcome the Minister's announcement today, not just as a former Crown prosecutor, but also because my constituency, the towns in my constituency, are sadly not immune from antisocial behaviour. We find that often it is a small group of people repeatedly committing antisocial behaviour in our towns. So does the Minister agree with me that respect orders will be a useful tool in intervening upon those repeated offenders, but also a useful tool to tackle the root causes of those people's behaviour?
Yeah. And again, can I just welcome my honourable friend to this debate, because I think her experience as a former Crown prosecutor is really valuable and very useful. And she's absolutely right. It's usually a small group of people who are engaging in this antisocial behaviour. So dealing with those prolific offenders through the use of respect orders, but also giving them something positive in terms of if it's drug treatment or alcohol addiction treatment that they need, or anger management courses. There is a positive part of this to try to deal with the underlying problems.
Coombs.
Madam Deputy Speaker, residents in Kenrick Way in West Brom dread Friday and Saturday nights because selfish people come and race their cars up and down, causing deafening noise and extremely dangerous crashes. This has been going on for years and years, despite the efforts of Sandwell Council and the West Mids Police. So can I ask the Minister what this announcement today is going to do to actually stop these races and give the residents in West Brom some peace and quiet?
So my honourable friend raises an issue that we've talked a lot about this afternoon. The specific issue is, at the moment, under the law, there has to be a warning given before any action can be taken to deal with these people who are racing and causing the harm and distress by the vehicles they're using. So this is about getting rid of that requirement for a warning, so action can be taken in a far more speedy way.
David Baines.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I add St Helens to the list of places that are interested in being a pilot? I warmly welcome this. As the Minister and others have said, there's nothing low-level about antisocial behaviour. It can destroy lives and communities, and it's right that we take it seriously. So I warmly welcome this. I'm particularly pleased to hear about the steps to protect shop workers and to take shoplifting seriously. Can she tell me a bit more about how that might help shop workers in St Helens North? And does she agree with me that it's great that we're giving police more powers to tackle antisocial behaviour, but they need resources as well to really make a difference in our communities?
Well, I'll certainly add my honourable friend's constituency to the list. It's a growing list, which is always positive. And I think the proposals that we will bring forward in terms of retail crime and assaults on retail workers, they will be in the forthcoming crime and policing bill next year. And I also think it's important to remember that this has been campaigned for many, many years to have this standalone offence, and I think there is now cross-party support for that offence to be set up, and that's thanks really to the campaigning of USDOR and Co-op in particular over many years.
Mark Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the announcement on respect orders today? It will be extremely welcome news for my constituents in Leeds South West and Morley. It is finally so good to have a government that will deal with the scourge of antisocial behaviour. I have sat with my constituents as they've been in tears explaining to me how their neighbour was making their lives hell. I've had constituents come in to my surgery who have told me that the police and the antisocial behaviour teams on the council have had no power to act, and respect orders finally have the chance to change this. Now, in the Minister's statement, she said that the respect orders would be reserved for the worst offenders. Well, I can think of several people who would fit that criteria. So what reassurance would she give my constituents that that criteria is going to be applied as liberally as possible?
Well, the definition that I gave earlier on around causing harm, harassment, alarm or distress is what's going to be looked at in terms of applying for these respect orders. I ought to say as well that the civil injunctions will still remain in terms of housing, so there will be that housing injunction that can be used. And also, these respect orders will only be for adults. So for young people, the youth injunction will still be available and there's sanctions within that. So there will be a range of ways that antisocial behaviour can be tackled using either the respect orders or some of the reformed civil injunctions.
Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hemel Hempstead has got some of the worst antisocial behaviour in our part of the county. We've got hot spots such as Liverson's Walk, Hoskins Court, Waveney and Swallowfields, with issues such as drug use, boy races with modified exhausts, abandoned vehicles, shoplifting and drunken noise. Examples of which I've seen evidence of when I've been out with our local police on the streets. Fortunately, there is a great project that Hemel Police are doing in the area of Grove Hill as a bit of a pilot to try and clear the area, rebuild relations and deal with the thugs in that area. Could the Policing Minister kindly outline the ways in which these new respect orders will help Hemel Police do that great work, and will she join me in paying tribute to the work they're doing to clean up our streets?
Absolutely, I will join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the work that the police are already doing, and also other partner agencies such as councils and housing associations. I know there's a great deal of good work going on around the country, and we need to build on that and give the police and others the powers that they need to be able to take forward the action that they want to bring forward in terms of dealing with this antisocial behaviour which has just grown and grown over recent times. So, and I'm also wondering if the honourable gentleman would like to add his constituency to the list of pilots.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For too many communities, antisocial behaviour has become a nightmare. But in Bracknell, my constituents are quite literally losing sleep over noisy and dangerous off-road bikes, which have been driven on footpaths, often late at night. So my constituents will really welcome the tough new powers introduced by this statement. Can I ask the Minister if she believes that these powers will finally allow my constituents to get a good night's sleep?
Well, Well, we all know the importance of a good night's sleep, so I hope very much that they will go some way in delivering that. There may be additional things that we need to do as well, but this is at least a start to remove that requirement of a warning before action can be taken to get rid of these vehicles off our roads and parks and pavements which are causing such problems.
Best till last, Andrew Pakes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think there's an unwritten rule in this House that the last question gets to be top of the pilot list. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure my county colleagues here will agree with me that Peterborough is the jewel in the crown. Peterborough City Centre is the jewel in the crown of Cambridgeshire, but with a beautiful, beautiful cathedral and wonderful diversity. But we are being let down by the rise in antisocial behaviour. Shoplifting, street drinking, thefts, intimidation are the big issues that Peterborough Positive, our fantastic bid, residents and businesses raise with me. Does the Minister recognise the sheer level of anger the British public feel at both the way antisocial behaviour has not been dealt with, but also the way they have been ghosted by the party on the opposite benches, being told they have never had it so good when it comes to dealing with antisocial behaviour? Will the Minister explain to the House how these measures today will help restore that trust and faith in the ability of government to do good on antisocial behaviour?
I think my honourable friend, even though he is the last to ask his question, has asked a very important one, and I think he's absolutely right that there is a huge amount of anger about how things have been allowed to get to the point that we're faced with today, and the complacency around the fact that there have been huge cuts to policing over the years. There hasn't been the investment in neighbourhood policing that we need. I think that's testament to where we are today in terms of having to tackle this antisocial behaviour. But my honourable friend also made an important point about business, because businesses are part of how we tackle this antisocial behaviour scourge in town centres, and working with businesses and encouraging small businesses to team up with bids and other groups in their city centres to make sure that they're working together and they're getting information to help them deal with particularly shoplifting.
That concludes that statement, and I will be moving on to point of order, Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This morning at Northern Ireland Office Questions, there wasn't a single MP from Northern Ireland on the order paper, and this has happened before, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have no criticism whatsoever of Mr Speaker, who does try and usually succeeds in getting Northern Ireland MPs in supplementary questions. But I understand also the numbers game works against us. But can it be reviewed in the future? For example, I noticed Scottish questions next week. Almost every person in the order paper is actually a Scottish MP, which is as it should be. It would be nice if occasionally we got a Northern Ireland Office question paper where a Northern Ireland MP was on it.
For the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. As he knows, the selection of substantive questions on the order paper is the outcome of a random shuffle of those members who actually table a question conducted by the table office. Mr Speaker made sure that a number of Northern Ireland members were called to ask supplementaries. Could I suggest to the honourable member that he might like to raise this matter with the Modernisation Committee? Now I move on to the 10-minute rule motion. Ten-minute rule motion, and I call Jessica Morden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to commission and publish a review of the legislation and guidance relating to e-scooters, to place a duty on the Secretary of State to promote public awareness of legislation relating to the use of e-scooters and for connected purposes. Almost 2 years to the day since I brought the first debate to this House on the antisocial use of e-bikes and e-scooter, and it's quite pertinent to follow the statement today from the Minister, and I too would be interested in a trial area, just getting that in there, trial order. I'm introducing this bill today to highlight an issue of much concern to many constituents in Newport East who frequently raise with me the antisocial use and sometimes dangerous use of e-scooters and in fact e-bikes as well. And I'd like to thank those residents and those Newport councillors, particularly in hotspot areas in my constituency, for talking to me about it. As we've all seen, the landscape on our roads has changed dramatically over recent years. The use of e-scooters has exploded, and it was estimated last year that e-scooter ownership is now close to 1 million in England alone. But legislation has just not kept up with this trend. Our legislation is years behind other countries. The bill is about asking the government to address this quickly, and I know there have been positive moves about this. And also, as we approach Christmas, when many people may be tempted to buy them as presents to remind potential buyers of the law. It's fair to say from the outset that there clearly is a place for e-scooters in the transport mix. They can play a really positive role in increasing transport choice while reducing pollution and congestion, particularly important too for young people with lower spending power and car ownership. As one of my constituents put it, I use one as a disabled person. I find it easier than a mobility scooter. I'm reluctant to go out and about more for fear of losing it. It is a cheap form of transport for the low paid, and safety will only improve with legislation. However, for many, e-scooters are a source of great anxiety. As I said earlier, many people raise this with me, including groups like the Scouts, local Scout groups, and many others. And recently, I asked constituents more widely for their thoughts, and here are some of their quotes. Some of the people riding these scooters and e-bikes have no regard for other people or the elderly, said one. Well, one other said the majority ruin it for the few that use them correctly. They are frequently used for blatant drug running and by people who have zero concern for pedestrian or driver safety. An older resident wrote to me, told me of his experience at nearly 75 recently of nearly getting knocked over whilst walking her dog, which really frightened her. Well, another said, my boy is a full-time wheelchair user. I've lost count of the amount of times we've nearly collided with e-bikes and scooters travelling at speed on pavements. And from another resident, unfortunately, they're often used for drug runs. Riders have masks, no helmets, and cut over the roundabout at the bottom of Somerton Bridge with no due care and attention to other drivers and pedestrians. And of course, we should consider the impact on the visually impaired. This is often highlighted by the RNIB, and I mentioned them certainly in a previous debate that I've held on this. These are complaints from constituents who live in Newport, where e-scooter use is illegal. It's illegal because e-scooter usage is only legal on our roads and cycleways as part of a public hire scheme where a trial is taking place. Trials have been running in locations in England since 2020, none in Wales and Scotland, I know, where I believe there was a lack of consultation by the last government with devolved governments. There are currently 19 locations where trials are active, and if you hire a scooter as part of the trial, there are restrictions including on weight, speed, up to 50 miles an hour max. They have to have lights, you have to have a valid driving licence, and the hire scheme operator must have motor vehicle insurance policy. They must meet some legal requirements. But beyond these hire schemes, whilst the sale of e-scooters is legal, using a privately owned e-scooter on public land, including on roads, pavements and cycle routes, is illegal and can lead to prosecution. Despite this legal position, sales have just rapidly increased. And the problem is, because they're unregulated, there are no limits on speed, with some sale online capable of being tampered with or reaching up to 60 miles an hour, no requirements for them to have lights, sound or any audible alert system, or people to wear helmets, no available insurance, no requirements around their maintenance, and no restrictions on their weight, with some e-scooters reported to weigh up to 70 kilograms. These are clearly not toys, and when collisions occur, victims can face serious injuries, and it's the Motor Insurance Bureau who pick up the bill for any compensation, thereby pushing up motor insurance premiums for all. In 2023, from which the most recent figures are available, there are almost 1,300 collisions involving e-scooters and 6 deaths. And I know it's an issue that's raised with many honourable members, including my honourable friend for Birmingham, Hall Green and Moseley, who's had a particular issue of an accident recently. There's also the issue of toxic lithium battery fires, with an e-bike or e-scooter fire once every 2 days in London in 2023. As the Minister said in a Westminster Hall debate before the election, it's often the result of unregulated e-scooters bought from retailers abroad, which fail to meet UK safety standards. And on that point, I strongly welcome the government's commitment to introduce a product safety metrology bill to address the fire risk. I also welcome confirmation this week from the Home Secretary and Ministers regarding the implementation of one of Labour's manifesto pledges that the government will strengthen the law around vehicles used for antisocial behaviour so they can be seized when such behaviour occurs without the police having to go through a lengthy process of issuing multiple warnings that delay action. And I do very much want to thank Gwent Police, who in tough circumstances are doing what they can to crack down on this and have success in seizing a number of e-scooters and e-bikes engaged in antisocial behaviour and criminality, particularly drug dealing. The penalties can include confiscation, £300 fines, 6 points on your licence and a criminal record. They've also taken the lead with social media campaigns around Christmas, and I would welcome more backup from the DFT and Home Office in enforcement and in public awareness campaigns, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. And this very much forms part of today's bill. Because buying online is easy. Just a cursory search brings up very well-known high street retailers who do display reasonably prominent disclaimers, but then go on to describe the e-scooter as the perfect fit for daily commuting and that you can get wherever you need to get to without hassle. Lesser-known retailers often hide the disclaimers or don't have one at all and sell e-scooters capable of reaching 40, 50, 60 miles, even 60 miles per hour. So, as well as raising awareness about the current law, I'm asking the government to review where we are now after nearly 5 years of trials with a view to legislating. Trials are just that, tests. In 2022, the last government promised to introduce a transport bill, but it never came, and e-scooter trials were extended this year before the election for a fourth time till May 2026. This leaves us one of the last few European countries not to have legislated on this. I therefore welcome the Secretary of State committing just a fortnight ago to look ahead for opportunities to include much needed and long overdue legislation. And in considering their options, I know ministers will hear and listen and consider the experiences and recommendations of key stakeholders like the police, perhaps looking or have suggested, as it currently stands, at looking at stricter penalties and restrictions on sales or imports, or like Sustrans, who asked for tighter regulation of e-scooter construction and specification, perhaps on speed, weight, safety requirements, as well as cooperation to solve pavement parking issues. So it's on this basis of these experiences, suggestions, and of course the trial data that this bill asks that the existing legislation and guidance be reviewed and public awareness raised to provide a clear, settled and long-term legislative solution to the challenges as well as the opportunities e-scooters present, so that we can make our roads safer for riders, pedestrians and other road users. And I urge colleagues to support it.
Yeah. Question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Jill German, Alex Barras-Curtis, Catherine Fuchs, Tonya Antoniazzi, Ruth Jones, Steve Witherden and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jessica Morden.
Straight as she comes.
E-scooters Review and Awareness Bill.
Second reading, what day?
14th of March 2025.
You hesitated, but we're saying the 14th of March 2025.
Yes.
The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Finance Bill, second reading.
Now, the reasoned amendment in the name of Mel Stride has been selected. Minister to move the second reading. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move this bill be read a second time. 4 weeks ago today, my Right Honourable friend the Chancellor delivered the first budget of this new government. It was a historic, once-in-a-generation budget. A budget to deliver economic stability, to fix the public finances and to secure a step change in investment. It was a budget to lay the essential foundations for growth, the #1 mission of this government. And let's face it, Madam Deputy Speaker, after 14 years of the party opposite, the foundations needed some fixing. That is why our budget was built on tough new fiscal rules. Rules that put a stop to borrowing for day-to-day spending and that get debt falling as a share of GDP. Our budget delivers fiscal responsibility whilst getting the NHS and other public services back on their feet and protecting working people. That is the difference a Labour budget makes. Now, that is not to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the decisions have been easy. The very opposite is true. We have taken difficult decisions on spending, welfare and tax, and this finance bill begins to implement some of those decisions. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I turn to what measures are within this bill, let me start by making a point about what it does not include. When I was a shadow minister, shadowing the tax brief from the opposition, I covered a total of 6 finance bills and probably as many ministers. Within those finance bills, we saw the Conservatives repeatedly extending the freeze on the personal allowance and the higher rate threshold for income tax. In Finance Act 2021, they froze income tax thresholds from 2022 until 2026. Then, in Finance Act 2023, they extended those freezes by another 2 years until 2028. The Conservatives were responsible for 6 years in a row of rising taxes on working people's payslips. Our government will not follow that path. In this finance bill, there are no tax rises on working people's payslips, nor indeed on many pensioners' incomes like those the party opposite put into law. We have made no changes to the basic, higher and additional rates of income tax. We have made no change to the rate of VAT, and in next week's National Insurance Bill, we will make no increase to the contributions that working people make. We said we would fix the public finances whilst protecting working people, and that is exactly what we are doing. We also said that we would provide stability for businesses making investment decisions and cap the rate of corporation tax. This bill delivers on those commitments too. Now, in the last Parliament, we saw finance bills being used repeatedly to put temporary measures in place, leading to an unstable and ever-changing regime on investment allowances. At the start of the last Parliament, the annual investment allowance had been temporarily raised to £1 million. That level was extended twice on a temporary basis before finally being made permanent. Meanwhile, full expensing for expenditure on plant and machinery was also introduced on a temporary basis. And of course, over the course of the last Parliament, the super deduction came and went entirely. We are doing things differently. Our corporate tax roadmap that was published at the budget and the finance bill before us today both make clear that we are prioritising the stability that we know businesses need to invest. I'll give way.
I wonder whether he agrees with Gary Smith, because this is supposed to be a budget for growth, supposed to be a budget for jobs. And yet, increasing the energy profits levy is driving investment out of the North Sea, will make not the slightest difference to how much oil and gas we consume, and yet we'll lose, I think it's an estimated 13 billion of much needed revenue for the taxpayer, meaning that we lose environmentally, in terms of jobs, and even fiscally. Surely even the Minister can recognise how wrong that is.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will get to the energy profits levy in a moment, but let me say briefly this, that we have engaged with the oil and gas industry to ensure that we raise the money that we need for the transition to clean energy, whilst at the same time supporting investment and jobs in that industry. We recognise it will play a part in the energy mix for years to come, but we also recognise they must make a contribution to the transition that is so essential for our country to make. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to make a little bit of progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I was saying about corporation tax, this bill maintains the cap on corporation tax at 25% that we set out in our manifesto. It also includes no changes to the permanent full expensing regime or the annual investment allowance. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I turn to other measures in this finance bill, I would like to note that the Leader of the Opposition seems to have already committed to reversing several of them. So let me just say this before I go any further. If the party opposite disagrees with the difficult but necessary choices this government has had to make, decisions to repair the public finances and to protect working people, they of course have every right to oppose our plans. But they must explain what choices they would make instead. So far, their new leadership has fallen at the very first hurdle of being a credible opposition by trying to have it both ways. Madam Deputy Speaker, they make plenty of noise, but I don't hear any alternatives. The Leader of the Opposition has said she opposes measures in this bill, but she also claims to support the investment those measures fund. She says that reintroducing the VAT tax break for private school fees would be the very first thing she would do if she became Prime Minister. And yet she also appears to support the extra £2.3 billion our budget has put into state education. In fact, we have calculated that the new Conservative leader has made unfunded pledges worth £12 million for every hour since she was appointed. By my reckoning, that's £1 million worth of pledges since I began speaking 5 minutes ago. In behaving this way, the Conservatives simply remind people how very far away they are from being a credible opposition and that they are getting further away by the day. I will give way.
Grateful to the Minister for giving way. The then Leader of the Opposition, now Prime Minister, rightly said that his administration would be going for growth. He made it his #1 priority. He inherited an economy that was the fastest growing in the G7. Can he say, we may shake his head, but it's a fact, can he say what's happened to growth since the 4th of July?
Madam Deputy Speaker, every business knows that you can only make investment decisions on the basis of secure public finances and economic stability, and that is why the first priority of this government has been to wipe the slate clean of the mess we inherited from the party opposite, deliver economic stability and provide the environment for businesses to make investment on which we will grow the economy. That remains our #1 mission, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I'm going to make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Chancellor set out in the budget, we believe that before making any changes to the rates of tax that people pay, it is vital we do everything we can to close the tax gap. That is why at the budget, the Chancellor announced a step change in our ambition to do so, with a package raising £6.5 billion of additional tax revenue by the year 2930. This package will make sure that more of the tax that is owed is paid, and that taxpayers are supported to pay the right tax first time. Our plan involves boosting the capacity of HMRC to ensure compliance and reduce debt, alongside changes to legislation, some of which this finance bill delivers to remove loopholes used to reduce tax liabilities. That is why this bill includes measures such as introducing capital gains on the liquidation of a limited liability partnership to close a route increasingly used to avoid paying tax. The bill reforms rules for overseas pensions transfers, closing a gap allowing individuals to transfer significant pension savings overseas tax-free. And the bill implements the crypto asset reporting framework, tackling complex compliant cases where a significant proportion of offshore risk sits. In our manifesto, we said we would take on the tax gap, and that is what we are doing in government. Now, I'll give way.
Grateful for the Minister. He recognises the importance of reducing the tax gap. So will he commend the former Conservative government for halving the tax gap during its administration from what they inherited from Labour in 2010?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we all know, efforts to close the tax gap had thoroughly stalled under the previous government, and we have brought renewed focus to this effort. For us, it is one of our top priorities. Before increasing the rates of any taxation, we must make sure that people pay the tax that is owed. And quite frankly, if the government opposite have been doing such a great job, how is it possible that our government has been able to find an extra £6.5 billion in closing the tax gap through our measures in our first budget alone? That was in our manifesto. That is what we are delivering. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in our manifesto, we also made other specific commitments on tax, and I will set out now how this bill seeks to implement them too. First, let me turn to non-DOMs in the tax system. As honourable and right honourable members will know, this government believes that everyone who is a long-term resident in the UK should pay their taxes here. That is why this government is removing the outdated concept of domicile status from the tax system, and why we are implementing a new residence-based regime from April the 6th, 2025. Now, we have long argued for this change to be made, and although the previous government ended up being forced to move toward our position, they never implemented any changes. Under this government, we will finally make the reforms necessary to make the system fit for the 21st century. Our new regime will be internationally competitive and focused on attracting the best talent and investment to the UK. Our reforms will scrap the planned 50% reduction in foreign income subject to tax in the first year of the new regime, introduce a new residence-based regime for inheritance tax, retain and reform overseas workday relief, encouraging employees to spend more of their earnings in the UK, and extend the previously announced temporary repatriation facility to 3 years from April 2025. These new rules mean that from April 2025, anyone who has been tax resident in the UK for more than 4 years will pay UK tax on their foreign income and gains, as is the case for other UK residents. This is a much simpler and clearer test than exists under the current regime. The Office of Budget Responsibility confirmed at the budget that these reforms will raise £12.7 billion in revenue over the 5-year forecast period, funding that is crucial to meeting our commitments to fixing the public finances. Second, in government, we have decided to go further than our manifesto commitment to increase the non-resident stamp duty surcharge, and we will instead increase the higher rates of stamp charge on additional dwellings from 3 percentage points to 5 above the standard residential rates. Increasing the higher rates of stamp duty will raise more money than the manifesto policy, a total of £310 million by 29/30, and it will go further to rebalance the housing market. The OBR certified costing assumes that increasing the higher rates of stamp duty by 2 percentage points is expected to result in 130,000 additional transactions over the next 5 years by first-time buyers and other people buying a primary residence. We estimate that approximately half of those who pay the non-resident stamp duty surcharge also pay the higher rates of stamp duty. This change will therefore improve the comparative advantage of UK resident home movers, whilst also ensuring that no additional barriers are faced by those coming to the UK and buying their main home. Third, this bill delivers our manifesto commitment to introduce the 20% standard rate of VAT on private school fees. This would apply to any charges charged on or after July the 29th for terms starting after January the 1st, 2025, and it sits alongside our changes to private schools' business rates relief in the legislation I spoke to on Monday. Ending tax breaks for private schools is a tough but necessary decision that will secure additional funding to help the government deliver its commitments to improving education in state schools across the country and achieving the aspiration that every parent has for a high-quality education for their children.
I will give way. I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. Madam Deputy Speaker, isn't it the case that state school parents work just as hard as private school parents? And that in this case, there are situations where no matter how hard they work, they will never be in a financial position to send their kids to private schools. And so it falls on this government to fund state schools properly.
Absolutely. My honourable friend is absolutely right that every parent aspires for a high-quality education for their children, and that is exactly what this government will achieve. The government will achieve that by the already announced £2.3 billion of increase to the core schools budget for the financial year 25-26, increasing per pupil funding in real terms, and this includes £1 billion of additional funding for the SEND system. I'll give way.
Giving way. He's obviously very dedicated to extolling the virtues of his manifesto. Can I ask him that when he was sitting down and writing the budget with his right honourable friend, the Chancellor, did he at any stage in the manifesto that was put to this country in the general election state that growth forecasts under this government would be lower than what they were under the last government? And did he put in his manifesto that he would be taxing small family farms for a total revenue that's coming in of £590 million? I know he's very keen on his manifesto, but did he outline that growth would be lower under this government?
Yeah, quite right. Yeah, I am keen on our manifesto. It was a manifesto to deliver this Labour majority and this Labour government. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, might I say this to the honourable gentleman, that if he looks at our manifesto, if he looks at our pledges that we went to the election with, 3 words open those pledges: deliver economic stability. That was crucial after the last government, after the mess that the last government made of the public finances, after the damage the last government did to our public services and our economy. Delivering economic stability, fixing the public finances, putting our public services back on a firm footing is essential to getting that investment and growth that our country so badly needs. Madam Deputy Speaker, now let me be clear in relation to the VAT policy on private school fees, that charging the standard rate of 20% does not mean that schools must increase their fees by 20%, because schools can reclaim VAT paid on inputs and reduce the cost to minimise the extent to which they need to increase fees. Many schools have already publicly committed to cap increases at 5%, or indeed absorb the full VAT costs themselves. Within this policy, I will give way.
The Minister giving way. When it comes to the school fees, in my area, for example, I have 2 private schools where parents have written that they're going to have to move out into the state system. The problem is there aren't places in the state system to accomplish that. So will there be a dedicated fund to help those schools when pupils do move? And is there also going to be some funds put aside for the welfare of the kids who are being taken out of school for mid-term transfers, which are expected to be about 3,000 pupils so far, according to figures released? That's going to have a significant impact on their mental health, their families' welfare. And I know this government's committed to making sure that children have good welfare. So would you consider a ring-fence fund to help support their mental health for those kids?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. More broadly on mental health, as he knows, that's a priority for this government. But specifically in relation to the policy around VAT on private school fees, as he mentioned, the impact on pupils in private schools having to change to a state school is expected to be very limited. As he will know, in the government's estimates, there is an estimated 35,000 pupils, less than 0.5% of all state school pupils, who will either leave or never enter the private sector as a result of this policy. Now, these movements will take place over a number of years, and only 3,000 pupils are estimated to move within the current academic year. And let me just put this, I will in one moment, let me just put this number in context for him. 3,000 pupils estimated to move within the current year. Every year, many pupils move between schools, including between private and the state sector. And a 2022 DFE report looking at this found that if you look at the moves between state schools and out-of-state schools, almost 60,000 moves take place every year. So I think we need to put this in context. As he will well know, pupil numbers in schools fluctuate regularly for a number of reasons, and the school funding system in England is already set up to manage that.
I thank my friend for giving way. Does he not think it ironic that the party opposite are talking about the mental health of students when they didn't consider the mental health of students with some of the changes they made to the state system? In particular, as a former teacher, I refer to the time they decided to go from lettered grades to numbers grades at short notice, completely change the syllabus and not actually provide the resources or the textbooks that teachers needed to actually teach those courses. And the impact that had on young people's mental health was absolutely massive.
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend very much for his intervention, and he's absolutely right to point out that the lack of funding that the previous government put into the state sector has implications. It takes a toll on children. If schools are not properly funded, if the capital budgets for schools are not properly funded as well as their revenue budgets, it has an impact on children's lives. And that is why the funding that we are putting into schools is something for which I will make no apology. The fact we are having to take difficult decisions to fund it is the nature of government. And I note that the party opposite are very happy to support our investment in state schools, but they absolutely refuse to support the difficult decisions necessary to generate that funding. And frankly, it underscores the fact that they are so far away from even being a credible opposition now they are on that side of the House. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've given way already to the honourable gentleman. I'm going to make a bit of progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that within this policy, provision for pupils with special educational needs is an important matter that a number of honourable and right honourable members have raised with me. The government recognises the importance of this too, and I'm glad to confirm that where pupils have special educational needs, they can only be met in private schools, as determined by an EHCP in England, or its equivalent in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Local authorities and devolved governments that fund these places will be compensated for the VAT they are charged on those pupils' fees. Fourthly, Madam Deputy Speaker, This government is delivering on its manifesto commitments to increase the energy profits levy by 3 percentage points from 35 to 38% and to extend the period over which the levy applies by 1 year. The government is also ending unjustifiably generous allowances by removing the levy's core investment allowance, which was unique to the oil and gas taxation and not available to any other sector in the economy. We are, however, providing stability within other features of the system by maintaining the level of tax relief available for decarbonisation investment by setting the rate of the allowance at 66% and by maintaining the availability of 100% first-year allowances. I'll give way.
Minister giving way. He's defending the changes that he's making to the fiscal regime as it relates to the North Sea and production of oil and gas. Can he identify another oil and gas producing nation that taxes their industry higher than the United Kingdom does?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, but obviously we know that other countries tax in different ways. We know that Norway has a high headline rate, although they have a different set of structures of allowances and so on. What is important for us is that we calibrate the headline rate and the allowances in the right way, which is why we've taken the measured decision to increase the rate as I described, to remove the investment allowance, but at the same time to retain the 100% first-year allowances and to retain the level of relief available for decarbonisation investment. And I will give way briefly.
Think that it is, does the Minister think that it is the right balance, given that the OEUK suggests that these changes will cost £12 billion in tax revenues?
I'm absolutely confident that through all of my engagement with OEUK and many firms who work in the oil and gas sector, that our approach gets the right balance that we need in our economy. It recognises that oil and gas producers will have a role in the energy mix for years to come, whilst also being clear that it is crucial we raise money for the energy transition, and the Energy Profits Levy seeks to achieve that by providing the money for that transition whilst also supporting jobs and investment in the sector as exists at the moment. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, fifthly, in terms of our manifesto commitments, this bill delivers on our commitment around carried interest by increasing the capital gains tax rates that apply to 32% as an interim measure from April the 6th next year, ahead of reforming carried interest more fully in a future finance bill. These reforms, which will have effect from April 2026, will ensure that the reward is taxed in line with its economic characteristics. They put the tax treatment of carried interest on a fairer and more stable footing for the long term, whilst preserving the UK's competitive position as a global asset management hub. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Chancellor set out both in July and again at the budget, the fiscal situation we inherited was far worse than we had expected. We know the previous government left us with a £22 billion black hole, and so we have had to take tough decisions to fix the public finances and to get public services back on their feet. Some of those decisions are outside the scope of this finance bill and will be debated as part of other bills' passage. But this bill does include a number of those decisions that we have sought to take in as fair a way as possible. The bill makes changes to the main rates of capital gains tax by increasing them to 18% and 24% from the 30th of October 2024, a decision that will raise revenue whilst ensuring the UK tax system remains internationally competitive. We are supporting businesses through this transition by maintaining business asset disposal relief with its £1 million lifetime limit and by phasing in the increase to this relief's CGT rate in line with the changes to investors' relief to 14% in April 2025 and then 18% in April 2026. The bill maintains inheritance tax thresholds at their current levels for a further 2 years to April the 5th, 2030. The bill legislates for air passenger duty rates for 25-26 and for those announced in the budget for 26-27. Now, from 26-27, all rates of air passenger duty will be adjusted to partially account for previous high inflation, a change that will help to maintain the value of air passenger duty rates in real terms. I'll give way.
To flying, Ryanair have come out and said they're going to cut 5 million flights, 5 million tickets because of this change. How does that help growth?
Well, let me put these decisions into context for the honourable gentleman, because the increase equates to £1 more for people taking domestic flights in economy class, £2 more for those flying to short-haul destinations in economy class. And none of these decisions are easy, but these are decisions that we have to take to fix the public finances and to get our economy back on a stable footing. I'm going to make some progress, because I'm going to make some progress. That's the impact that these changes have in terms of domestic flights in economy class and short-haul destinations in economy class. But in addition to the broad increases and broad changes in air passenger duty rates, the higher rates for larger private jets will also increase by a further 50% to ensure that they contribute fairly to the public finances. The bill also renews the tobacco duty escalator and enables HMRC to prepare for the introduction of a new duty on vaping products. The bill increases the soft drink industry levy over the next 5 years to reflect the 27% increase in CPI inflation between 2018 and 2024, as well as increasing the rate in line with CPI each year from the 1st of April 2025. And finally, whilst the bill increases alcohol duty for non-draft products in line with RPI inflation, duty on qualifying draft products will be cut by 1.7% in cash terms to support pubs, and we will increase the duty discount on products that qualify for small producer relief from February the 1st, 2025. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor has been clear that this budget was a once-in-a-generation event at which the government took difficult but necessary decisions. By taking those tough decisions, the budget delivers economic stability, sound public finances and stronger public services. And on those foundations, we will work day in, day out across the rest of this Parliament to boost investment and growth. Now, many of the measures to boost investment are, of course, being delivered outside of this finance bill, from the planning reform that we got underway within days of taking office, to the creation of mega funds for pension investments, which the Chancellor announced at Mansion House. Within this bill, we are introducing additional reliefs for our creative industries for visual effects in film and high-end TV, which will play a key role in strengthening the UK as a global hub for film and TV. Likewise, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill introduces measures to support the transition to electric vehicles through higher vehicle excise duty first-year rates for hybrid and internal combustion engine vehicles, boosting the incentive for EVs, and by an extension of first-year allowances for electric cars and charge points until 25-26. But above and beyond any individual measures, the impact of this bill and the budget that it follows are to investment of growth through fiscal responsibility, stronger public services and economic stability. We have laid the foundations for creating wealth, jobs and opportunity in every part of this country, enabling people to meet their aspirations for themselves and their families and making people across Britain better off.
For giving way. One of the measures, of course, that has a bearing on the provision of public services is the increase to the employers' national insurance contributions. Now, I understand that Treasury is in discussion with the devolved governments and local government across England to ascertain precisely how much extra funding support is required to offset the increased cost upon their services. Can I just ask the Minister to give us an update on those discussions and when he believes local authorities and indeed the devolved governments will know how much money and additional support they'll be receiving?
I'm afraid I'm not going to give the honourable gentleman inside information on any discussions which are ongoing between the Treasury and devolved governments, but the policy for reimbursing increases in employer national insurance contributions is well established. The last government followed a similar process in relation to the health and social care levy, whereby departments and employees and other direct public sector employees are typically refunded the entire increase. Third parties, contractors and so on are not, and in terms of the devolved government's settlements, they have their own process to go through with the Treasury. I'm sure he'll understand why I can't give a running commentary on that, but I'm sure his colleagues will pick that up. I'm going to make some progress. I've been generous in giving way to the honourable gentleman in particular, because Madam Deputy Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker. All right, okay, go on then. Go on then.
I'm very grateful to the Minister who is showing his customary good humour and goodwill to the Chamber. He was unable to discuss the precise numbers for the devolved, but could he confirm what the overall cost is to the Exchequer of compensating the public sector overall for the impact of NICs? I believe it's around 5.9 billion, but I just want to check with the Minister that that's correct.
Do I regret giving way to the honourable gentleman? What I might invite the honourable gentleman to do is perhaps return to the chamber next Tuesday for the National Insurance Contributions Bill, which I will also be speaking at, and he can have a full debate on national insurance then, which I'm sure he and his colleagues are looking forward to, and I hope will support in the division lobbies, because no doubt they support the extra investment in the NHS, which that decision funds. And so I thank him in advance for signalling his good grace and support for our measures that we are taking. Madam Deputy Speaker, after we were elected, we said we would take the difficult decisions necessary to fix the public finances. We said we would close the tax gap, implement our manifesto pledges and protect working people. We said we would deliver economic stability, fiscal responsibility and the certainty that businesses need to invest and grow. This bill plays a central role in achieving those goals, and I commend it to the House.
Question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the Shadow Minister Mel Stride.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment standing in my name. Madam Deputy Speaker, this finance bill, this budget are a disgrace. They are a disgrace because they are built upon a deceit that was propagated by the party opposite during the last general election. They told the British people they need not worry about taxes being raised left, right and centre. And yet what have we discovered? Within the OBR's figures, it clearly shows that this country is now heading to its highest tax burden in the history of our nation. We were also told, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the party opposite during the general election there was no intention of increasing national insurance. In fact, it stated exactly that within the manifesto upon which the government stood. And they broke that commitment. Don't take my word for it. Paul Johnson of the IFS says exactly that. And that, of course, I will give way to the
Secretary of State giving way. Isn't the point that the manifesto said there would be no rise on national insurance, but when ministers went to defend this policy, they said not on working people, but then couldn't define working people. Now the language has slipped to pay slips. Is the Shadow Minister aware of this in terms of the translation? And I'm pretty sure it wasn't written in the manifesto about a pay slip being mentioned.
Makes an important and very valid point. And of course, indeed, as he says, what the party opposite are now claiming is that there will be no incidence of this tax increase upon working people, although they seem to have a problem defining exactly what a working person is. But nonetheless, try telling that to those people who will see their wages depressed as a consequence of this measure. Try telling that to the 50,000 full-time equivalents who the OBR say will lose their jobs as a consequence of this measure. Tell that to the young people who, because it's not just the increase in the rate, it is also an approximate halving of the threshold, will disproportionately affect them, younger people up and down our country. The party opposite also reassured farmers. The then Shadow Secretary of State for DEFRA, the now Secretary of State, reassured farmers. He went to the NFU. He told them there would be nothing to be done on inheritance tax and APT. And on that basis, the NFU told their members that at least on that measure, there was nothing to fear from a future Labour government. Well, how wrong they were. And we've seen only last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, farmers in their dignified way, in their tens of thousands, coming up to the very gates of our democracy to ask a simple question of the party opposite. Why did you lie to us? That is the nub of it, Madam Deputy Speaker. It will see the break-up of our farms and it will do nothing for food security. I will certainly give way to the honourable gentleman.
To the Shadow Minister. Does he agree with me that the government could not conceivably have been so ignorant about British agriculture that they didn't know that inheriting the family farm is no form of enrichment whatsoever? So introducing this change to APR is just pure bad government.
Absolutely, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. It demonstrates that this government does not understand farming, it does not understand the countryside. There are 100 members opposite who represent rural constituencies. I'm not going to guess how many there will be after the next general election, but some number fewer than 100, I suspect. And perhaps the cruelest cut of all, the cruelest deception, Madam Deputy Speaker, was of our pensioners, who were reassured that there would not be any means testing of the winter fuel payment. And yet what happened? 10 million pensioners to face a cut. And before somebody on the opposite benches stands up and tells us that some of those pensioners can afford it, many of them, Madam Deputy Speaker, simply cannot. Over 2/3 of those affected by this measure, of those under the poverty line, 2/3 will actually lose these benefits. That is, yes, I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Protest, and that while the Prime Minister was out of the country on the 19th, something else was snuck out on the 19th, which was a DWP letter explaining that from analysis, their own internal analysis, they knew at the point of the decision when they were deciding what to do, it was going to impoverish 100,000 pensioners in relative poverty and 50,000 pensioners into absolute poverty. This information was asked for time and time again in this House for that debate. Isn't it right that these kind of measures should have that information ready for a debate like we have today?
The honourable friend is absolutely right. It is disgraceful that the party opposite waited until the farmers were at the gates of Westminster to slip out, to sneak out that impact survey, which indeed did show that by 2027 there will be 100,000 more pensioners in relative poverty after housing costs than is the case today. And indeed, the analysis by the party opposite back in 2017, when they were against this particular proposal, was that up to 4,000 pensioners would prematurely die in the cold as a consequence of this measure. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, when you deal in deceit, you need a pretext for so doing. And a further deceit has been brought forward, and the Minister raised it again at the dispatch box this afternoon, this £22 billion black hole.
Where is it?
Where is it? I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
The Shadow Minister for giving way. And I'm just reflecting on the tone that is being taken in these remarks, because I'm also looking at chart 4.5 in the Office of Budget Responsibilities document, looking at the rise in the tax to GDP ratio that is going on. And it is a big increase in the tax to GDP ratio, but from the indignant tone that the Right Honourable Member is making, you would think that there had never been a tax rise under the previous government. What the chart shows is a significantly larger rise in the tax to GDP ratio because of the decisions taken by the previous government. So doesn't the Right Honourable Member not think that his tone does not reflect the facts of the decisions that he took?
Order. Before the member responds, can I caution the member on using the word deceit in the chamber? But no doubt you want to respond to that intervention.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will of course be guided by you on that matter. But as to the honourable gentleman's point, there is no doubt that the analysis, as we went into the last general election, of the three major parties' manifestos and the impact that they would have on the tax burden was that the Labour parties would be by far the greatest increase in the tax burden. And of course, what the Labour Party have done is to break their manifesto and go still further to take us, as I said earlier, according to the OBR, to what will be the highest tax burden in the history of our country. It's as simple as that. So I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
The Right Honourable Member for giving way. I did want to indulge him, but he has now mentioned the OBR 3 times during the course of his speech. I wonder if he wanted to share with the House what conversations he had with former Prime Minister Liz Truss about respecting the OBR before she crashed the economy and set inflation to 11%.
Well, as the then chair of the Treasury Select Committee at that particular time, I had quite a lot to say about it. In fact, and I would point him to the public record on that particular matter. But the fact of the matter is that the party opposite claim that this £22 billion vast black hole, which you could sense, you could even see from the moon. Now, when the OBR looked at this matter, they concluded that the fiscal pressure, in fact, was under half that figure. They also made the point that had it been known at that time, there would have been discussions between Treasury officials and the OBR, and that number might well have been smaller still. And it is equally the case that, of course, governments manage down in-year fiscal pressures as a matter of course. So, to use another astronomer's analogy, this is not so much a black hole as a red dwarf. Simple as that, or red herring, even better. But this is not just about misleading the British people. This is about economic incompetence. This government has set great store on growth. It is saying that it will generate the fastest, consistently, sustainably growing economy in the G7. Well, how? Well, I see members nodding their heads. How is that going? The first thing, to go back to our friends the OBR, is that the forecast around this budget clearly showed across the forecast a lower level of growth than was the case when they gave the forecast around our budget the preceding spring. A direct consequence of the kind of policies, the growth-destroying policies that this government is engaged with. What happened when the ONS came out with its figures at the end of September, recently, for the third quarter? I'll come to the honourable gentleman in a minute. The third quarter of this.
The member has twice used the word you in the chamber today. The first time he was heckling and I let him off, but I won't be letting him off again in the future. Mel Shrike.
Well, I take it as a familiar mark of respect from the honourable gentleman to myself. But the simple fact of the matter is that the ONS's figures for the third quarter of this year shows growth of 0.1%. That is 1/7 of what has been achieved in the United States. And indeed, in September, that month alone, the third month of the quarter, there was negative growth. And the reason for that is very clear, that when this government came to office, the first thing they did was to talk down the economy. The first thing they did was to talk about black holes, to say what a terrible mess everything was, as cover for what they always intended to do all along. And that had an impact on these PMI surveys, and you can see it in the data. You can see the slump in business confidence, and they are now reaping the whirlwind. And we have now, of course, had a budget that will do even more damage when it comes to growth. And what is going to happen to inflation? Go back to our friends the OBR. In every single year of the forecast, inflation is higher than every single year of the forecast under our last budget back in the spring. A fiscal splurge up front that will translate through into higher prices and higher interest rates for longer, higher mortgages. And before everyone on that side starts jumping up and down at the M word, the government now owns mortgage interest rates, and they are being affected in the wrong direction as a result of their policies. And what about living standards? Living standards down, flatlining. In fact, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation says that by October 2029, the average family will be £770 in real terms worse off than they are today. So, on their watch. And there are a number of measures in this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, that will further weigh on growth. CGT up, destroying wealth creation. The energy profits levy, destroying jobs, making us less secure when it comes to our energy. Stamp duty going up, one of the worst taxes, and I know the honourable gentleman who just intervened will accept that. I know we share exactly that view. I think he makes that point in his recent book, actually. The level of activity in the housing market, will be dampened. The people will be discouraged from downsizing, which will put pressure on the housing supply. And of course, labour mobility will be impacted as well, an important component of growth itself. I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and he is painting an accurate but bleak picture, as reflected by the IFS, the OBR, in fact all the independent analysts, of what the impact of this budget will be. But can I put it to my right honourable friend that he is understating the weakness that it creates for this country? Because look back at the last 14 years, we were recovering from the financial crash, you had the pandemic, you had Brexit, you had the energy crisis. We are unlikely to make it to the end of this decade without some form of further shock. And isn't it central to the weakness of this budget that it makes this country so much more vulnerable to what we do not yet know what is coming?
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very perceptive point, and I will come to his point momentarily. But let me just deal with one other matter, which is VAT on private schools. We have already heard about the displacement effect, the behavioural effect, the thousands of pupils that will have their education disrupted and the impact on their families. But does not this measure, Madam Deputy Speaker, tell you all you need to know about socialism? Those who stretch to try and make ends meet, to send their children to those schools, are to be denied. Their aspiration to be sacrificed on the altar of envy. Is it not as simple as that? And to my right honourable friend's point, he is absolutely right. This is not creating the strong foundations for the future. This is creating a vulnerable and brittle economy. The Chancellor has very little headroom against her fiscal targets. Against the stability target, it's quite conceivable that because the government has talked down the economy and gilt rates have responded in turn, that actually almost all of that headroom may already have disappeared. And I will prophesy, Madam Deputy Speaker, that without doubt, because either the forecasts may turn in the wrong direction, or the pressure on departmental spending over the next 2 years on will become difficult for a profligate Labour government, or some external factors, my right honourable friend has pointed out, maybe tariffs from Donald Trump's America, or maybe his deficit funding of tax cuts will lead to higher bond yields and higher interest rates here. However it occurs, I will almost guarantee you that this government will come back for more in due course. And can I let my right honourable gallant friend prophesy?
To be fair to the Prime Minister, he did make it absolutely clear that things would have to get worse. The difficulty is, and this is my prophecy if you like, there is no prospect of them getting better thereafter.
I think that is an extremely astute observation, if I might say so, from my right honourable friend. So the prophecy is that things will get tougher further down the line. And it will then be the case that this government took decisions that left us in a weak and vulnerable position to withstand them. And of course, why has this happened? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite has very little business experience. If you look at the front bench, there are very few who have started up a business or grown a company in any significant manner. I'll give way. Perhaps this is the example of somebody who's done just that. Yeah.
Thank you for giving way. If the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues are against all the revenue-raising measures in the budget, perhaps he'd like to explain to us which of the many investments in the health service, in roads, in the justice system and schools that he and his colleagues would cut.
It is not a binary decision like that, and the honourable gentleman is clever enough. No. I'm sorry, I won't be disrespectful to the honourable gentleman to claim that he really, truly believes that. Of course, if you come forward with a budget, as we would have done, that would have grown the economy, then you have more money. If you had grasped the nettle of welfare reform, which we did when we were in office, and we had very clear plans in our manifesto, a saving of £12 billion a year, then you don't have to go around caning companies and beating up on pensioners and so on as an alternative. There are better ways of doing this, and we had a much, much better way. Yes,
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, in her conversation with the CBI, which didn't go terribly well earlier this week, said that her tax-raising days are over. And yet, significantly, I think, the Minister of the Dispatch Box failed to reiterate that assertion. Does he believe her?
Well, my right honourable friend raises a very interesting point, because indeed the Chancellor did say at the CBI, when asked, that she would not be raising taxes in the future, and the Prime Minister did at this dispatch box this very afternoon appear to resile from that. So we now actually don't even have clarity on that vital and important point. But surely the point is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Chancellor is no economist. The Chancellor, no matter how much puff one applies to try and disguise the fact. And I did actually think that I would take a leaf out of her book, even though that page was apparently written by somebody else. And I can inform the House that, of course, I am an economist, as a former governor of the Bank of England, as president of the International Monetary Fund, as somebody who ran the World Bank and the World Trade Organization at the same time, and yes, for 10 years. I have as much experience as our Chancellor. Now, that flight of fancy, of course, is all mine, but the inspiration lies on the benches opposite. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a finance bill of broken promises, of breathtaking incompetence, a finance bill that represents a present danger to the future of our economy. Was there ever a bill more injurious to that which we on this side of the House love? Our pensioners, our farmers, our businesses, the poor, the vulnerable, and yes, the working men and women right up and down our country. They say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that astrologers are there to make economists look good. Well, not this lot. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is written in the stars. It is a story foretold. Unchecked, this budget, this finance bill, is going to take Britain down, which is why we will never tire of the trials of opposition, why we will be the party that stands up for the working men and women up and down our country to fight this government.
And now, to make her maiden speech, Samantha Niblett.
Caught me off guard, didn't expect to be quite so soon. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is with great humility and immense pride that I stand here today delivering my first speech in this chamber as the Member of Parliament for South Derbyshire. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the people of South Derbyshire for placing their trust in me. I was visible, accessible and active right across the constituency before the election was called and took great pride in proving it by directing people to my Samantha Spotting interactive online map. And I am committed to continuing in the same vein, working incredibly hard for the people that I represent. And I want to thank my predecessor, Heather Wheeler, who has dedicated so much of her life to both local and national politics, 14 years as an MP, and if an internet search result isn't tricking me, a career that began in local politics in 1982 when she was just 23 years old, later becoming an elected councillor in South Derbyshire in 1995 and going on to be leader of the council. Her commitment to public service was rewarded in the 2023 Birthday Honours List, and I also hear, on repeat and on good authority, that she was also jolly good fun in this